page and the instructions first. So our paper consists of two different sections, and in each section, learners are required to choose at least one question. So I'll be dealing preferably with the first section, which is source-based questions, whereby you have question 1, 2, and 3. So the first question is the Cold War and the origins of the Cold War. Then the second question is independent Africa, which is actually a case study. Then the third question will be civil society protests from 1950s to the 1970s and the civil rights movement. So whenever you're dealing with source-based questions, you need to start by going through your sources. So we would switch on to the addendum, where you would come across the key question. So our key question reads, how did Berlin become a focal point of the Cold War tension between the Soviet Union, the USSR, and the United States of America in 1948? So we are going to look at source 1A, which is actually an extract from a book titled The Berlin Wall, How It Rose and How It Fell. It highlights the disagreements that were reached by the victorious powers regarding the administration of Germany after the Second World War. I think you know that Berlin became a focal point in the Cold War, which broke out between the USSR and the USA. So here is source A. That is source A. So as candidates, you're encouraged to read your sources in detail. You're supposed to go through them in detail before you attempt any questions. So we assume that you have gone through the source. Then now let's quickly switch on to the questions. So if you look at the questions, the key question, I will read it again. How did Berlin become a focal point of the Cold War tension between the Soviet Union, USSR, and the United States of America in 1948? So the first question, 1.1.1, it says refer to source 1A. Identify in the source. So our keyword then is in the source. Our answers are going to be extracted from the source. So let's underline the keyword which says in the source. So what are we looking for? We are actually looking for 3 countries that made up the European Advisory Commission. So if you refer back to the source, I'm going to quickly switch on to the source. In the first paragraph, you come across 3 countries which actually which belonged to the European Advisory Commission. So the key countries are the United States of America. That would be the first country which belonged to the European Advisory Commission. So I'm going to highlight the 3 countries which the answer, where we are going to get the answers from. So it's actually United States of America. Then we also have Britain and the Soviet Union. Then, so on our question paper, I'm going to write the 3 countries. That's the USA. So the 3 countries that made up the European Advisory Commission, the United States of America. So we start by writing the United States of America, USA. Then we also have Britain. Then lastly, we have the Soviet Union. So these are the 3 answers. So our question actually requires 3 responses. So we have the United States of America, we also have Britain, then we also have the Soviet Union. Those are the 3 countries which made up the European Advisory Commission. Now let's move on to the next question. Why, according to the source, was it decided at Yalta in 1945 to also create a zone for France in Germany? Why was it agreed at the Yalta Conference to create a zone for France in Germany? So we refer back to the source. We go back to our source, then we look for the answer in our source. So if you look at the source, at the time it was decided that Germany would be divided into 3 zones for each country except for France. So the reason why France was left out is simply because France was a victim of the German invasion. It was actually a victim of the German invasion. So I'm going to write the required answer there. France was actually a victim. France was a victim of German invasion. France was actually a victim of German invasion. So that's why it was decided to create a zone for France in Germany. She was actually a victim. So they wanted to protect the interest of France against future invasion. Then 1.13 says, explain why, according to the occupying countries, why you think the occupying countries to ensure that Germans were not able to build up a military force again. So we are going to take our answer from the extract or from the source. If you go back to the source, there is actually mention of how they would prevent Germany from being able to build a military force again. So the first thing is that they agreed on a border to the west. So I'm going to highlight where we are going to extract the answer from. So they agreed on a border in the west. Then secondly, a temporary line for the east was to be Oder and the nearest rivers. Each occupying country had to ensure that the Germans were not going to build up a military force again. So let's go back to our question paper where we are going to write these possible answers. So the Allies, the first thing is that the Allies, they agreed on a border to the west. So you can actually say that a border to the west was agreed upon. To the west was set up. Border to the west was set up. Then secondly, another line to the east. A line to the east was set up again. There was also a line to the east. So explain why you think to ensure that, all right. The reason why they did this, they agreed on a border to the west so that they can ensure that to avoid future German aggression. To avoid future German aggression. So explain why you think the occupying countries had to ensure that the Germans were not able to build up a military force again. So they wanted to avoid future German aggression, or you can also say that they wanted to protect France. They wanted to protect France, which was a victim of the invasion during the Second World War. Now let's go on to the next question, which says, comment on the implications of having a seat of Berlin in the Soviet Union in the context of Cold War tensions between the USSR and the USA. So when you look at such a question, it needs your own opinion. It actually needs your own comment. So we would highlight the keyword which says comment. Then we also highlight the implications of having Berlin city of having the city of Berlin in the Soviet Union in the context of Cold War. All right. So if you look at such a question, the Berlin Wall, which the Soviets set up, was actually going to prevent the West from accessing, from having further influence. So you can say that the Berlin War, which was set up by the Soviet Union, would prevent Western influence. It would prevent Western influence in Berlin, or you can say in Germany. So it would prevent Western influence in Berlin. You can also say that it would result, it would symbolize the defeat of the West. It would, the Berlin Wall would prevent Western influence in Berlin, and it would also simply, it would symbolize the defeat of the Western interests in Berlin. So these are the implications of having a city under Soviet Union. If the Soviets were going to control the whole of Berlin, it simply means that the West would not have influence in Berlin, and it would symbolize the defeat of the West by the Soviet Union. Now, let's go to source 1b. So when you deal with source 1b, you'd also want to go through source 1b. So for this purpose, we would just get through source 1b, then we would highlight the key points. So the source below is an extract from the Berlin Crisis. So it's actually an extract from a Berlin Crisis, a report on Moscow discussions, 1948, by the US Department of State. So this caption, we also need to highlight the key words on this particular caption. It is actually an extract from the report by the US Department of State delivered to the representative of the USSR. So you should bear in mind that such a source, simply because it is coming from the Americans, it will be written from the point of view of the Americans. Now let's get back to the question and address the demands of the question. Define the term blockade in your own words. Such a type of a question does not require you to refer to the source, but it requires your own knowledge. So a simple definition of a blockade, it is actually an act It is an act of war. It is an act of war whereby one party blocks access to another part. Or you can say, or out of another part of the country. You can say the country or territory. So a blockade can be defined as an act of war whereby one party blocks access to another part or out of another part of the territory. So it is when one party which is involved in a war, it actually blocks access to one part of a territory or one part of a country. So it means that movement is actually restricted when they say blockade. People cannot move in or they cannot move out. So that is what happened during the Berlin blockade. The Russians or the Soviet Union actually blocked movement into and out of Berlin. All right, now let's move on to the next question, which is question 1.23. Quote 3 reasons from the source why the USA was determined to remain as a power in Berlin. So the USA was determined to remain as a power simply because of quite a number of the reason, quite a number of reasons. Explain why the USA regarded the Berlin blockade as a clear violation of the existing agreements concerning the administration of Berlin. All right, let's start with question 2.2, to which the answers are going to be written below. Explain why you think the USA regarded the Berlin blockade as a clear violation of the existing agreements concerning the administration of Berlin. So, the first thing which we need to indicate is that the first thing which we need to indicate is the reasons why the USA considered the blockade or the Berlin blockade as a violation. All right, the USA had quite a number of reasons for doing that. They had quite a number of reasons for doing that. So the reasons are stated in the following paragraphs, which I would highlight. So the first is that the blockade itself, it went against what the superpowers or what the powers had agreed upon. So it did not go according to the formal agreements of the principal allies. Then another consideration was that they needed to protect the interests of hundreds of thousands of women and children which were in the two territories. So they felt concerned because they needed to protect the interests of the children who were occupying the zones in question. Then let's go back to the question itself. Explain why you think the USA regarded the Berlin blockade as a clear violation. Yes. So the first reason, you can say that the blockade was actually the opposite of what they agreed upon. The blockade was actually against what the powers had agreed upon. The blockade went against what the powers had initially agreed upon. Then secondly, you can also see that the blockade limited the movement of people. The movement of people from one point to another. Of goods and people. Therefore, that's why it was considered to be a violation of the existing agreements. Now, let's go to the next one, 1.2.3. Quote 3 reasons from the source why this USA was determined to remain as a power in Berlin. We know very well that the Berlin crisis is one of the most important incidents of the Cold War. So one of the reasons why the USA was involved in the Cold War, it was trying to maintain the balance of power. So you can say to maintain the balance of power. The balance of power. In other words, we are saying that the USA did not want the USSR to expand further so that they can maintain a balance of power between the two superpowers who were contesting in the Cold War. Then you can also say that for its own safety, for the USA safety, another reason was for the United States of America to be safe, so that they can be safe from any form of attack from the Soviet Union. In addition to that, you can add another point, a third point, that they wanted to contain the spread of communism, to contain the spread of communism. That is another reason why they had to remain as a power in Berlin. Then let's go to the next question, 1.2.4. State one specific obligation. So we need to highlight this keyword obligation. What does the term obligation mean? When we talk about an obligation, we are talking about an responsibility. So the United States of America, according to them, they had a specific obligation, which we find in the source. So if we refer back to source B, if we go to paragraph paragraph number 4, you would find where it is written that including hundreds of thousands of children and children obliged, or it actually forced the United States of America to insist that in accordance with the existing agreements, in the movement of freight passenger traffic between the western zones and Berlin may be fully restored. So one of the obligations of the United States of America was to maintain the flow of goods, or the flow of goods and services from one area to another. So you can actually say the USA was obliged had an obligation to maintain the flow of essential goods. The flow of essential goods and also the freedom of movement. So these are the two suggested answers for that particular question. Those are the two suggested answers. Now let's move on to the next source, which is source 1C. Source 1C, we need to refer to the source itself. So we look at, firstly, we look at the source itself, source 1C. All right, source 1C, we need to look at where it was extracted from. So the source below is dated 14 July 1948, is a Soviet Union response. So we need to highlight the fact that it's coming from the Soviet Union side. We have seen earlier on that we are looking at a source which comes from the United States of America's side. So it was actually a note sent to the Soviet Union on the 6th of July 1948. It outlines the steps the Soviet command would take to protect its control of Britain. Now let's refer back to the question. All right. Give two reasons, according to the source, why the Soviet Union opposed the introduction of a special currency to be used in the western part of Berlin. So they had specific reasons of not allowing them currency to be introduced in Berlin, which I'm going to outline. So the first would extract it from the source itself. So there was a special currency which was introduced, which could only be used in the eastern side of Berlin, but it could not be used in the other part of Berlin. So it actually undermined the economy of East Berlin. So that's the first reason. You can say that it resulted in inflation. It resulted in inflation. Then the second reason is that it undermined the economy of Berlin. So in other words, we are actually saying that West Berlin became much more economically prosperous, but Eastern Berlin became actually poorer and poorer. So these are the reasons why the Soviet Union opposed the introduction of a special currency to be used in the Western part only. It resulted in inflation, then it also undermined the economy of Western Berlin. Now let's go to 1.3.2. Explain the concept of monetary reform in the context of the Berlin zones in 1948. Such a type of equation does not need you to consult from the source because it requires you to explain your own understanding of a historical concept. So the concept of monetary reform, it was actually a concept whereby the Western powers introduced the Deutschmark, which was a new currency which replaced the old currency called the Reichsmark. So monetary reform in the context of the Berlin zone simply means or refers to an action whereby the Western powers introduced the Deutschmark, which was a new currency, which actually replaced the old currency, which was called the Reichsmark. Then let's move on to the next question, 1.3.3. Why, according to the source, did the Soviet command believe that the danger of disruption of economic activities of the Soviet zone and of Berlin was not eliminated? So such a type of a question would want you to refer to the source. You need to refer to the source again. So it is written in paragraph number 1 that moreover, the carrying out of separate monetary, financial, or highlight where we are extracting our answer from, the carrying out of separate monetary reform in the Western zone has replaced the whole Soviet zone of occupation in a situation in which the entire mass currency of notes which were cancelled in the Western zone threatened to pour into the Berlin and the Soviet zone of occupation. So we can actually simplify this into simpler words. Let's go back to the question. Why, according to the source, did the Soviet Union believe that the danger of disruption of economic activities of the Soviet Union was not eliminated? All right, the danger remained there because the introduction of the currency of the new currency made the old currency worthless. The introduction of the new currency made the old currency to become worthless. In other words, it actually lost its original value. Then you can also add that it undermined the economic prosperity of Eastern Berlin. We can call it the economic standing of East Berlin. All right. Those are the two suggested answers for that particular question. Now, on 1.3.4, it reads, comment on the limitations of this source to a historian researching on the division of Berlin. So whenever you're analyzing the limitations of a source, you need to first look at where the source was taken from. So if you go back to source 1C, this source dated below, dated 14 July 1948 is a Soviet Union response. So where is it coming from? It's actually coming from the Soviets. So the fact that it's coming from the Soviet Union, it simply means that it is biased, or it is actually in favor of the Soviets. So our limitation, I'll write the answer a little bit below. All right. Comment on the limitations. So you can actually say that it is written from a Soviet perspective. It is written from a Soviet point of view. So we cannot trust such a source because it's not written from a neutral point of view. It is leaning towards the Soviets. So it is biased towards the Soviet Union. It is biased towards the Soviets. That is the suggested answer. Then that is only one. So if you write one answer, you only get 1 mark. So what we can do, you can suggest another answer. It is biased towards the Soviets. Then in addition to that, you can say that the source is written. The source is written from a Soviet point of view. Point of view. Therefore, it can be considered as propaganda. It can be propaganda. So you can actually say it is an unreliable source. So this will be the response for question 1.34. Now let's go to question 1.5.1. Now, if you look at 1.5.1, it is actually a visual source. There is a cartoon which appears there on 1.1.4. It is actually a visual source. This source is actually entitled Under the Lane, which translates in English as Under the Linden Trees by Sir S.J. Ray, published in the U.S. Kansas City newspaper on 2 December 1948. It actually depicts Stalin cutting the city of Berlin into 2 parts. So you can actually see the 2 figures there. Stalin is depicted as the gentleman who is actually on his feet and who is cutting the Berlin tree. Then on the other hand, we have Britain. Then we also have the United States of America on the opposite side. They are watching as Stalin is cutting up Berlin into 2 pieces. Then we also have France also involved in that particular scenario. Now let's go back to the question for that particular source. All right, consult sources 1B and C and comment on how 1B differs from source 1C. That is question 1.4. All right, so if you look at source 1B, I would write the answers for question 1.4 below. All right, if you look at source 1B, it regards the blockade as a violation. Is written from an American perspective. It is actually written from or let's call it a Western perspective rather, not American. It is written from a Western perspective. It is written from a Western perspective. It is written from a Western perspective. In addition to that, it views the blockade. It views the blockade as a violation of the agreement. So according to source 1B, the Soviets actually violated the agreement which took place in 1948. Then on the other hand, if you look at source 1C, it has a different view. It actually has a different view of the same events. So source 1C criticizes source 1C criticizes the West for introducing a currency reform in Berlin. Reform in Berlin. So that is the difference between the sources. If you look at source 1B, it is written from a Western perspective. It views the blockade as a violation of the agreement. But if you look at source 1C, it actually criticizes the West for introducing the currency reform in Berlin. So at the end of the day, you can see that the two sources contradict each other. The two sources contradict with one another. They do not agree. They have different views about the same thing. The two sources contradict each other in as far as the Berlin Conference or the Berlin blockade is concerned. So there is no agreement on these two sources. They actually contradict each other. They do not agree with one another. So that is what you can actually say when it comes to that. Consult sources 1 and B, comment on how they differ regarding the reasons given by the USA and the Soviet Union for remaining as occupying powers. All right, so let's go to the next one. The next question will be 1.5.1. Explain the symbolic representation of these three powers seated next to each other. All right, the symbolic, it's the three powers actually had common interest. They represented the same interests in during the Cold War. So you can write your answer below. The three powers shared common interest. They actually shared common interests in as far as Berlin was concerned. Then let's go to the next one, 1.5.2. Why did Stalin want to have a final say in the administration of what? Of Berlin? For this particular question, you can say that Stalin wanted to control, to represent rather, the interest of Berlin, the interests of the USSR. Soviet Union. Stalin was interested in securing the interest of the Soviet Union. He was actually scared that once the Westerns encroach into Berlin, the Soviet Union will be weakened. It will no longer have power in the context of the Cold War. So those are the suggested answers from those particular questions. Now, let's move on to the next question, which is 1.6. When you look at 1.6, it actually says using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge. Write the paragraph of 8 lines, about 80 words, explaining how Berlin became a focal point of Cold War tension between the Soviet Union, USSR, and the USSR in 1948. So if you look at the Soviet Union, or if you look at the USSR, you can actually see that the way their interests are stated in the sources, they are actually different. Another thing which I would want to draw your attention to is you are actually supposed to use information in the relevant sources. So you choose information in the relevant sources. Then you are also supposed to stick to the length of 8 lines then writing in paragraph format. Then also include your own knowledge about what was taking place during the Cold War or during the Berlin blockade. So our paragraph, I'm going to write it below in red. It will be 1.6. To actually be paragraph 1.6. So when it comes to this paragraph, the first statement is that you can start by saying that the city of Berlin the city of Berlin became a focal point in the Cold War. In addition to this, you can say that according to source, now we are including information from the sources. According to source A, the European Advisory Commission divided Germany into 3 zones. Divided Germany into 3 zones of occupation. Source B discusses how the Soviets set up a blockade in Berlin, and how this violated the agreement. Then in source C, the Soviet Union expresses its displeasure of the introduction of currency reforms the introduction of currency reforms by the West, by Western powers, then in addition to that, source D illustrates, remember it's a visual source, it illustrates how Stalin divided Germany, or Berlin rather, into two zones So this is the difference between these sources. So if you look at our paragraph, it's made up of roughly about 8 lines. So the first statement is that the city of Berlin became a focal point in the Cold War. According to source A, the European Advisory Commission divided Yemen into 3 zones of occupation. Then source B discusses how the Soviets set up a blockade in Berlin. Then in doing so, they actually violated the agreement which they had as the advisory commission. Then in source C, the Soviet Union expresses its displeasure of the introduction of the currency reforms by Western powers. Then source B also illustrates how Stalin divided the Berlin into 2 different zones. So this all shows that Berlin was a center, or it was actually a ground of contention between or amongst them superpower during the Cold War. It was actually a center or a ground for contention. Now let's move on to the second question. Remember, when you're answering a history paper, you have a choice of choosing 2 questions from the source-based question, and you choose 1 from the essays. Or you can actually choose 2 essay questions, then you can choose 1 source-based question. So we are going to attempt another source-based question based on question 2. What factors led to the 3 nationalist movements, MPLA, FNLA, and UNITA, becoming involved in the Angolan Civil War? So this is the key question. So there are some things which we need to highlight, some key words which we need to highlight as we discuss this particular question. So what factors led to the 3 nationalist movements? So which are the 3 nationalist movements? We have MPLA, FNLA, and UNITA. How did they become involved in the Angolan wars? Then we are also going to investigate the factors that led to their involvement in that particular war. So the question says study sources 2A, B, C, and D, and answer the questions that follow. So let's quickly look at source A, 2A, source 2A. All right, source 2A, it actually outlines how Agostinho Neto, under the Popular Movement for Liberation of Angola, took control of Angola after the country achieved full independence from Portugal on 11 November 1975. Remember, the country achieved independence in 1975. Immediately after that, we had a liberation movement led by one known as Agostinho Neto, who was representing the party or the movement known as MPLA. So we want to find out how he ended up getting into power. So the key terms there is Agostinho Neto. Then which political party did he represent? Is the MPLA. Now back to the questions. If you go back to the question, the first question, it says define the term revolution in your own words. Such a type of a question does not need you to, it doesn't need you to refer to the source simply because it is emphasizing in your own words. We actually need to highlight the term or the phrase in your own words to emphasize what the question actually requires. To actually emphasize what the question requires. So it says in your own words. So when a question says in your own words, you don't need to refer to the what? To the source. You only attempt it in your own words. A revolution can be described in the following way. You can actually describe the revolution or define a revolution as a revolution is a complete change change in the areas of politics, or it can be in the area of the economy, or in society. So a revolution can be defined as a complete change. So the answer for 2.1 is written above there. It is a complete change in the areas of politics, economy, or in society. It is when a country moves from one place to another, or when there's a complete change in politics, economy, or even in the way people live, which we refer to as society. Then immediately after that, let's go on to the next question, which I would write below them. Identify the three nationalist movements. Our three nationalist movements are stated explicitly in the source. If you go back to the source, there are three nationalist movements which are mentioned there. So the first one, I'm going to highlight it. It was known as the Popular Movement of the Liberation of Angola, which is here. One of the three was the Popular Movement. I'm going to highlight it again. Okay. It was the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, which is abbreviated as the MPLA, led by one known as Agostinho Neto. Then in addition to that, there was another one which was known as the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, which is also known as the FNLA. That is the next one. Then the third one was known as the National Union of the Total Independence of Angola, which is also known as the UNITA. So those are the three liberation movements. I'm going to transfer them, then I'm also going to write them on the question paper. So the first one, we are saying it was MPLA. We are going to abbreviate them so that they can fit. Then the second one, it's UNITA and FNLA. These are the three nationalist movements which existed in Angola at the time of independence, that is in 1975. So immediately after that, we also look at the next question, which is actually name two communist countries in the source which Neto formed close links with. If you go back to the source, you'll find that Agostinho Neto, he had close links with some communist states. Some, if you go to this line, he established a one-party state, and his government developed close links with the Soviet Union. So our first communist state would be the Soviet Union. We know very well that the Soviet Union was actually a communist state. Then also we have Cuba. So our two answers, we get them from them, then we transfer them to our question paper. So name two communist countries which NATO had close links with. So the first one is the Soviet Union. Then the second one is actually Cuba. So those are the two countries which were related to MPLA under the leadership of Agostinho Neto. Then if you go to 2.1.4, What does the execution of Neto Alves followers suggest about Neto's leadership? If we go back to the source, I think you can recall the part when he violently, where it is written, he violently repressed a movement later called fractionism. So, in which a 1977 attempted coup d'etat overthrowing an existing government inspired by Augustino dos Comandante. So, these people who attempted to overthrow Neto's government were actually killed. They were actually executed. So now, to address the demands of the question says, what does the execution of Neto Alves followers suggest about Neto's leadership? Here, there are so many words which you can use to describe the leadership of Neto. You can actually say that he was actually a ruthless leader. It actually shows that he did not show mercy. He was a ruthless leader. He was actually a ruthless leader who did not show mercy. You can actually say that he was a ruthless leader. In addition to that, you can also say that he was a tyrant. Then you can also say that he was bloodthirsty. All right, so those are the three descriptions which you can use to describe Neto's leadership. He was a tyranny, he was a ruthless leader, he was also bloodthirsty. So moving on, let's refer to source 2b. If you look at source 2b, you can actually see that source 2b is more of a visual source. It's actually a photograph. So this photograph was titled Angola's Brutal History. It is written there, and the MPLA's role in it. So it actually appeared in a newspaper known as the Guardian newspaper on 5 May 2014. It was taken in December 1976. So it depicts soldiers of the MPLA who fought in the Angolan civil war. I think you can also look at it. If you look at this type of image closely, you can actually see the type of weapons which these people were carrying. Then you can also see even their eagerness to. Okay, now moving on to question 2.2.1. It is based on a visual source. Let's have a look at the visual source. So the visual source actually shows the popular movement for the liberation of Angola, or the MPLA fighters, as they are in combat, or as they are engaging in an act of war. So the first question, okay, it actually reads, why do you think the photograph was taken in 1975? Why do you think this photograph was taken in 1975? So such a type of a question, it requires your own opinion. As long as it is justified by logic, it can be a correct answer. So in this case, you can actually say that the photo was actually a symbol of the cruel nature of the Angolan war. It seeks to demonstrate the cruel nature of the Angolan civil war. So I'm going to write the suggested answer right below. The image is a symbol of the cruelty of the civil war. All right. The mark allocation, it actually says that there is need for you to provide 2 responses is 2 times 2. So another suggestion is that it also shows demonstrates the participants of the war. The symbol, it actually demonstrates the participants of the war who was involved. So in that particular instance, you can actually see the MPLA fighters. Then comment on the implication of the title of the photograph. Let's go back to the title of the photograph. The title of the photograph is actually Angola's Brutal History, and the MPLA's role in it. So, all right, the title of the photograph implies the MPLA was to a larger extent brutal in the war. All right, that is the implication of the title. Then the next question, explain the term civil war in the context of the contestation of power in Angola. But before we attempt that one, there is yet another question, which is question 2.3.1. Why, according to the source, did the transition from Portuguese rule turn into a disaster? So if you go back to the source, it actually says that when the transition, when the Portuguese withdrew, when the Portuguese withdrew, from Angola, there was no preparation. There was no preparation for transition of power. There was no preparation for transition of power, so it resulted in three different liberation struggles fighting against one another. The liberation struggle, actually, it involved three parties, namely the MPLA, and it also included UNITA and also the FNLA. So that's why, according to the source, the transition from Portuguese in rule, it actually turned into a disaster. Now, the next question, it requires a definition of terms. Explain the term civil war. A civil war is a war fought by people from the same country. A civil war is a war fought by people from the same country. People from the same country. For example, in Angola, we had three different liberation movements fighting against one another. We had the MPLA on one side, then we also had the FNLA on the other side. Then there was also UNITA on the other side. So those three liberation movements were fighting against one another. So such a state of affairs is actually referred to as a civil war. So a civil war is a war fought by people from the same country. Then going on to 2.3.3, comments on the meaning of the statement, but both were determined for reasons of their own prestige in the context of the involvement of the Angolan Civil War. The two who are being referred to here are the two superpowers, namely the USA and the USSR. So their involvement in Angola was for their own selfish reasons. So why were they involved? We're going to comment on the meaning of that particular statement. So the first thing, they used Angola to fight their proxy war, fight a proxy war. A proxy war, it is a war which is fought by representatives of two parties which are not actually actively involved. So the USSR and the USA, they used Angola to fight a proxy war. In addition to that, they were determined to spread communism and capitalism. They were determined to spread their ideologies. So their respective ideologies, on one side, USA, we are referring to capitalism. They wanted to spread capitalism. Then on the other side, we have the USSR wanted to spread communism. So that's why they became involved in this war. So the first point, they used Angola to fight a proxy war. Then secondly, they were determined to spread their ideologies, which are capitalism and communism. Now, 2.3.4, it is a question which requires you to examine the useful of a source. To a historian who is studying history on the Angolan War. So we need to look back at our source. We need to look back at our source and have a look at it. If we look at source C, we first look at where it is coming from. This is a book by historian M. Medit. It's titled "The First Dance of Freedom." It is actually entitled "The First Break of Freedom." All right, when you look at it, it outlines the crisis created by Portugal during the transition of power. So its usefulness, it actually narrates the events which happened in November 1975, which is actually a useful feature. Then it also discusses the different parties which were involved. We are going to underline that as well. Then it also mentions names of participants during the time when Portugal got independence. So all that that is actually useful. So going back to our question, now we need to answer the question. Explain the usefulness. So you can actually say that the source is useful to a greater extent. The source is useful to a greater extent. Actually useful to a greater extent because it mentions the dates, the events, dates, names of the commissioner, and the liberation movement. So you can actually say that to a large extent, it's a very, very useful source. It is useful to a greater extent because it mentions the names, dates, then the names of the commissioner in the liberation movement. And one other thing is that it actually narrates, it gives a first hand account of what actually happened during that time when there was a transition of power from the Portuguese to the liberation movements such as the MPLA. Now, moving on to the next question, 2.4. 2.4, when you move on to 2.4, it requires us to study source D. All right, source D. Let's have a look at source D. Source D, it is actually a source below titled Africa since 1940. That is the first thing, the past and the present. It was written by a historian called F. Cooper. It explains ideological differences amongst the three nationalist movements in Angola and how they were shaped by ethnic differences as well as support from foreign powers. So going back to the question now, the first question, it actually says, quote the evidence from the source. Quote the evidence, we are actually going to quote from the source. So let me underline the keyword quote evidence. I'm going to circle it there. Quote the key evidence. Okay, let's highlight what the question requires from us. So it says quote evidence from the source, which suggests that MPLA was leaning towards nationalism and socialism. So if you go back to the source, you'll find evidence of the first statement. It actually says the popular movement for the liberation of Angola, which is the MPLA, it was actually led by Agostinho Neto. It looked upon politics from a nationalistic. So we start highlighting from nationalistic. We highlight from a nationalistic. Okay, the words, they've looked upon politics from a nationalistic and socialist senses. So that is where we get our answer, nationalistic and socialistic lenses. Now let's transfer that answer to our question paper. They viewed politics, the NPLA viewed politics from nationalistic and socialist lenses. They actually viewed politics from nationalist and socialist lenses. So that answers the first question. Now moving on to the next question, which is question 2.2.4. Explain what you think is implied by the following in the context of the Angolan War. Conflict became ethnicized. So in this case, we need to highlight the word ethnicized so that we can address fully the demands of the question. All right, conflict became fully ethnicized. When you look at ethnicity, we are looking at people's culture. So it actually means that war was now based on ethnical differences. So the war became the war was based on cultural differences. It was now based on cultural differences. You would have people from one culture fighting from people from the other culture. For example, the UNITA came from the southern part. They spoke a different language. Then the other one came from the other part. So now war was based on cultural differences. Then the next question reads, why, according to the source, did the Central Intelligence Agency, which is the CIA, support the FNLA? So the CIO, which is an American organization. So the fact that it's an American organization, it shows that they did not like communism. So the FNLA, if you go back to the source where we get the answer, you can highlight where we get the answer in the second paragraph, where it says the FNLA was supported by Zaire and the Central Intelligence Agency, which saw it as the least Marxist. I think you know that Marxism and communism, they go hand in hand. So Marxism and communism, these are two similar ideologies or two related ideologies. So the CIA felt that the FNLA was the least Marxist or the least communist, if you can put it that way. It simply means the same thing, was the least communist or Marxist. So remember, the CIA is an American organization. So they tend to support organizations which are more capitalist than communist or Marxist. So that is the reason. Now, moving on to 2.4.4, using the information in the source and your own knowledge, comment on why you think South Africa decided to support UNITA. You know very well of the case between Namibia and South Africa. So the first reason was that South Africa wanted to create a buffer state, a buffer space actually, to create a buffer zone South Africa wanted to create a buffer zone between Angola and Namibia. Remember, the apartheid government did not like communist ideologies coming into Namibia or coming into South Africa. So they wanted to create a buffer state, a buffer zone whereby it was not a buffer zone which does not support communism. So in other words, they wanted to prevent the spread of communism, prevent the spread of communism to South Africa or to apartheid South Africa. They also opposed communism. So simply because they supported UNITA, UNITA itself, it was a less communist liberation movement. So that's why they got involved. That's why apartheid government got involved. Now going on to 2.4.5, quote two pieces of evidence from the source that suggest the MPLA did not improve the lives of the Angolan people. So there is evidence in the source which shows that the MPLA was actually doing things for its own benefit, but it not benefit the ordinary Angolan people. So we are going to quote that text from our source. So if you go back to the last paragraph, we want to go to where it is written, education and health services languished. It means this actually suffered. Then in addition to that, you can also say that the MPLA combined the features of a Soviet party and the African gate scarcity. Its real source of power was oil revenue coming from militarized enclaves, and after gestures at revolutionizing agriculture, it did little in the countryside. So we are getting another point then. The MPLA did little in the countryside. In addition to that, education and health actually suffered under their watch. So let's go back to where we would indicate the answers. All right, so the first point, the MPLA did little to improve education and health. In addition to that, you can also say that there were more, they did little to improve education and health. Let's go back to our source again and quote another. Then they did little in rural areas. They did little in rural areas. They only recruited soldiers. They only recruited soldiers. So instead of developing the rural communities, they were more focused on recruiting soldiers. Then it's also indicated that education and health actually suffered under the watch of the MPLA. So now moving on to the next question, which is 2.5. Question 2.5, which requires us to look at sources 2C and 2D. Explain how the evidence in source 2C supports the evidence in source 2D regarding the approach followed by three nationalistic movements. So if you look at these sources, you can actually say, let's refer back to them. We look at source, the first source is source 2B. Then we are going to look at its similarity. All right. The first source, which is 2B, actually we can see soldiers who are ready for war or for combat. All right. But this one requires us to look at 2C, rather. 2C. All right, 2C. Then we also look at 2D. All right. So both sources okay, in source 2C, source 2C. Source 2C, it's more of look at it. Let's look at it. Source 2C describes how the transition of power from the Portuguese to the MPLA, how the transition of power from the Portuguese to the MPLA, how the transition from the MPLA, from the Portuguese to the MPLA was disastrous for the country. Source 2C again also discusses the differences between the liberation movement amongst the three movements. The three movements which are UNITA, MPLA, and the FNLA. On the other hand, if you look at source D, it also, source D also supports source C or 2C by demonstrating how the superpowers were drawn into the Angolan conflict. Supporting different liberation movements. So that's where you see that these two sources, they complement each other. So you can actually say the two sources are complementary. They are complementary, they support each other. Now, going on to the next question, which is a paragraph question. Using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of 8 lines explaining the factors that led to the three nationalistic organizations, MPLA, becoming involved in this Angolan civil war. All right, this question, it is actually a paragraph question which needs much more ample space. So we are going to create space on the addenda to show how those two three political movements or political formations, how they ended up fighting against one another. So back to the question. It says, using the information and the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of 8 lines explaining the factors that led to the three nationalistic movement, MPLA, FNLA, and UNITA becoming involved in the Angolan conflict. So we can start by saying, we can indicate the question which we are answering. which is question 2.6. 2.6, that's the paragraph name. So we can start by indicating that the change from Portuguese to nationalist rule was not a smooth away. It was not a smooth affair, which means that it did not go on well. So the first thing is, according to source A, there were three liberation movements. There were three liberation movements, namely MPLA, UNITA, and the FNLA. In addition to this, we can also indicate that the MPLA emerged as the victorious power, and the leader Neto ruled in a ruthless fashion. The leader of the MPLA, that's Agostinho Neto, he actually ruled in a ruthless manner. He suppressed opponents using violence. Source 2B complements source A. Source C and D also discuss the ideological differences between amongst the three movements. All right. Source D also explains how the superpowers also contributed to the differences. or conflict amongst the three liberation movements. Ethnicity was also another factor which led to the conflict. All right, so we have quite a number of factors here. So the change from the Portuguese to nationalist rule itself, it wasn't a smooth affair. Then we are told that the Portuguese simply left overnight without preparation of who was going to be in charge. Then in addition to that, there were three political movements which were competing for power. We have the MPLA, the UNITA, and also the FNLA. Then the MPLA emerged as the victorious power. The leader, Neto, instead of uniting the three political movements, he actually suppressed his opponents using violence. Then we also have source 2C and 2B. They also complement source A. They actually say that they also discuss the ideological differences amongst the three movements. You find that the other movement was Marxist, the other one was aligned towards the Chinese, the other one was aligned towards the Soviets. Then another one was aligned towards the CIA. Then source D also explains how the superpowers contributed to the differences or conflict amongst the three liberation movements. Then ethnicity was also another crucial factor which led to the conflict. So all those are the factors which led to the conflicts, or which led to the three nationalistic movements becoming involved in the Angolan Civil War of 1975. So that is a question. That is actually question 2. That is the end of question 2. So now we are going to the last of our source-based question, which is question 3. Question 3, it is based on the American Civil Rights Movement. So it starts with the key. What challenges were encountered by the civil rights protesters who participated in the freedom rights in the United States of America? So this topic is basically the CRM, the Civil Rights Movement. So it is a question which investigates the nature of the challenges which they faced in their quest to get civil rights. So here is the first source, which is 3A. The source below was taken from the book Freedom Riders 1961 and The Struggle for Racial Justice, written by Ara Esnault, a civil rights activist and a militant student leader. It highlights the commitment of the Freedom Riders during the 1960s. So let's go back to the question itself. How, according to the source, did the Freedom Riders set out to challenge racial discrimination? So if you go back to the source, it clearly spells us how, according to the source. So the Freedom Riders set out to change the world. They did so simply by boarding a bus, not as blacks or whites, restricted by an outmoded system of racial discrimination, but as free and full citizens. Yes. So this is where we get our answer, so we need to highlight it. So they simply did it by boarding a bus, not as black or whites, restricted by an outdated mode of racial discrimination, but as free and full citizens. All right. So you can say, okay, the Freedom Riders boarded a bus not as black and white, they boarded a bus not as black or white, but they did so as a method of protest. They did so as a method of protest, but they did so as a method of protest, not as black and white, but as free citizens. So you can actually say that by doing so, they were challenging segregation laws. We're challenging racial segregation. By so doing, they did it as a collective, both black and white. They rode a bus as free citizens, not as not within their racial differences or boundaries. Now let's go to the next one, 3.1.2. Define the term constitution in your own words. So constitution, simply in simple terms, you can say the supreme law of the land. Of the land. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, or you can say it is a document which spells out the supreme law. The supreme law. It is a document which spells out the supreme laws. That is the document on which all the other laws are based on. Then 3.1.3, comment on what is meant by the statement. They also knew that they might be injured or even killed for trying to exercise their rights. So we need the on comment. So what is the meaning of this statement? The Freedom Riders were aware fully aware of their repression. Repression is when you're expressing yourself, then someone opposes you. They were fully aware of repression or of their opponents. They were fully aware of repression of their opponents. Using the information in the source below and your own knowledge, explain why President J.F. Kennedy took immediate action of desegregating the United States of America. All right, so in this one, we need to find reasons why he took immediate action. So you can actually say it was as a result of the effectiveness of the nonviolent resistance. That is one reason. You can go back to the source and find another reason again. All right. The second reason is that they used passive resistance to oppose segregation. So you can actually use indicate that the use of passive resistance caused him to give in. All right, the effective use of passive resistance actually forced him to give in to the demands of the Freedom Riders. Moving on to the next question. Which is 3.2. 2.1, which requires us to look at source B. All right, source B is actually a visual source, which is a newspaper article published by the New York Amsterdam News on the 20th of May, 1961. All right, it actually reads inhuman. Then there are images of a bus which is on fire. Then there is a caption which says the flames of hatred. So the question reads, explain why you think the newspaper article made front page headline news. Explain the reasons why you think this newspaper article made front page headline news. So a suggested answer for that question is that the incident was of national importance. The incident was of national importance. Then you can also say that to grab the attention of citizens. Then the second thing is that why do you think the article was titled Inhuman? The article seeks to portray the brutality of segregation. Seeks to portray the brutality of segregation. Then to attract sympathy. Sympathy from the audience. Another reason is to attract sympathy from the audience, because you can see that these are emotive words which have been used, the flames of hatred and also the words inhuman. So they seek to attract the sympathy of from the audience. Then if you go to source C, it is actually an interview between Stanley Nelson, a writer and a filmmaker, who interviewed James Swag. So if you look at this interview, it is actually a first-hand source of information. Then now let's refer to the questions. What, according to the source, motivated Swag and his colleagues to get involved in the freedom rides? So if you go back to it, we need to quote the words of Swag. You got involved in freedom rides, where we got a word from the Congress of Racial Equality Corps, Freedom Right. We knew that journalists was going to be involved in it. Okay, so they actually joined in solidarity. All right, they joined in solidarity with members of CORE. They did it as a sign of solidarity to show oneness with members of them, CORE, C-O-R-E. So that is one of the reasons why they joined. Then give two options stated by Swag that his FT priest would take if they were jailed for participating in the freedom ride. So we refer back to the source. We identify other reasons why two options stated . One of the things we agreed upon is that if you were jailed, you go on hunger strike. Then, because in our minds we were jailed illegally, you don't cope or opt for a plea, you don't pay bail, you don't jump. So these are the two options. Let's go back to the questions. To go on hunger strike, to go on hunger strike, not to pay bail. These are the two options which they chose. All right, going on to 3.3.3. Why would a historian consider this source reliable when researching in the 1961 riots in the USA? So if you look at this, the source contains first-hand information from a participant and an eyewitness. That is the first thing. Then also let's go back to it and see what else might be useful. All right, then we also have names of places are mentioned, names of organizations are also mentioned, which makes it useful. All right, it contains useful names, names of organizations, events, and even dates. That's when the events happened. So that is what makes this source useful. Going on to 3.4.1, study source D. Look at source D. It is actually part of an interview conducted. It appeared in the book My Soul is Rested. Then it focuses on the treatment of injured freedom fighters experienced in Alabama. All right, so if we go back to the question, the first question reads, give 3 reasons in the source why protesters were taken to hospital. So the first reason is because of smoke inhalation. They inhaled smoke. Then in addition to that, they were cut by glass since it was an accident. Then they also needed to be treated for what? For trauma. Because there's a part which is indicated that they were actually confused, which means that they were traumatized by the events. Then comment on what is implied by the government Patterson statement regarding the freedom status. Any rioters in this state will not receive political protection. So, in other words, the governor did not support the cause of the freedom riders. Then he actually referred to them as rioters instead of freedom riders. So he referred to them in a way which shows contempt. Contempt or hatred. court evidence from the source which indicates that the hospital did not administer or assist injured patients. Court evidence, we go back there. If we go back to evidence, you can actually see that there is a part, the people at the hospital did not do anything for us. These words would not do anything for us. The people at the hospital, people at the hospital did not do anything for us. The people at the hospital did not do anything for us. That is the evidence which shows that they were not assisted at the hospital. Explain the term segregationist in the context of the state of Alabama. Okay, it means separation between people of different races. Simply means separation of people of different races, or you can say discrimination based on race. It was actually discrimination based on race. Give two pieces of evidence from the source which indicate that Governor Patterson was militant and segregationist. The first thing, he asked the governor was associated with the Ku Klux Klan. We know very well that the Ku Klux Klan opposed the civil rights movement. The governor was associated with the Ku Klux Klan. That is the first thing which shows that he was a militant segregationist. In addition to that, we can also indicate the fact that he actually promised to use violence violence. Then the next question is 3.5. Source, consult on sources 3C and 3D. Explain the evidence in source C that is supported by evidence in source 3D regarding from the treatment of freedom riders. So the first thing, we indicate what is in source 3C. Source 3C is a first-hand account by the participant. Narrating the reasons why they became involved. Then source D also complements source 3D complements source C It also complements source 2C in demonstrating the brutal nature of the American government during that time. So that is how the two sources complement each other. They actually say the same thing. They actually support the fact that blacks or the freedom riders, they actually faced resistance from the government, and they were also treated in a very, very cruel manner. They were actually treated with contempt. So this is how these sources complement each other. So using the information in the relevant sources and your own knowledge, write a paragraph of about 8 lines or 8 words explaining the challenges that were faced by the freedom riders. So the first thing is that you can indicate that the freedom riders, they stood in solidarity. They went beyond their racial differences. Then they cooperated and participated in freedom rides. Freedom rides are instances whereby they went on a bus to show their displeasure in the separation of the modes of transport used by different racial groups. So as they were doing so, some of them, they became victims of the system. Some of them were attacked and some of them were injured in a bus which was actually attacked by opponents of the civil rights movement. Then in addition to that, you can also indicate that even the police was not on their side. When they went to the hospitals, also the hospital staff were not on their side. Instead of treating them, they actually watched them, and the police authorities also threatened to put them into prison. However, they remained determined in their struggle. They even used other non-violent methods such as refusing to pay bail or also going on hunger strike. So this is a summary of how or what the civil rights movement organizers, especially the freedom riders, went through. Okay, which brings us to the end of the source-based questions.
All right, we are continuing with our discussion on the essay question, question number 4 on the extension of Cold War, which is a case study of Vietnam. All right, in this meantime, let's shift our attention and look at the strategies that the USA tried to use, which were counteracted and made ineffective by the tactics that the Viet Cong guerrillas implemented during the Vietnam War. Right. When you're looking at the US strategies, we need to analyze them and see how they were counteracted by the Viet Cong strategies and how they were made ineffective. Because at the end of the war, it is US which lost the war. So it meant that whatever strategy that the USA tried to use in the war was counteracted by the tactics of the Viet Cong. It was made ineffective, leading to the loss of USA in the Vietnam War. So I will highlight on some particular strategies that the US used in the Vietnam War. I will start with the Operation Rolling Thunder. Right, the USA introduced the operation which was codenamed Rolling Thunder. That was in March 1965. What was the Rolling Thunder about? It was a strategy which involved the using of aircrafts to bomb the guerrillas, to go bomb the Viet Cong guerrillas. They were trying to identify the Viet Cong guerrillas and bomb them using aircrafts. That was apparently the Operation Rolling Thunder. And what was their target? Were using this strategy. When they implemented the Operation Rolling Thunder, their target was to eliminate the Viet Cong. They were targeting to eliminate all the guerrillas. They were thinking that with a bombing tactic, they would be able to ultimately eliminate all the Viet Cong guerrillas. But however, the strategy was ineffective. How was the strategy ineffective? Right. Remember, they could not distinguish who the guerrilla was, who the civilian was, because of the non-wearing of uniform by the guerrillas and the blending of the guerrillas with the environment. and also the mixing of the guerrillas with the civilians. So they would not identify who the guerrillas were. So it meant that for America, that strategy did not achieve desired results because of the fact that they could not identify who the guerrilla was. They were counteracted by the non-wearing of uniforms by the guerrillas, who were the Viet Cong guerrillas. So that strategy did not work. Apparently, it worked in the favor of the Viet Cong instead of in the favor of America, who devised the strategy. Because what happened was the Americans ended up bombing even innocent civilians. And that led to widespread criticism of America on a global scale. And America became very unpopular for killing civilians in a war, for massacre of civilians who are innocent in a war. So apparently America was forced to withdraw that strategy because of its image, which was now being painted bad on the international community. Because of it losing popularity, it was forced to withdraw the bombing strategy. Therefore, it was the effectiveness of the non-wearing of uniforms by the guerrillas, which made the bombing strategy by America ineffective. They could not continue using such a strategy due to the fact that they were doing massacres of innocent civilians because they would not identify who the guerrilla was and who a civilian was in the war. Then we also analyze the other strategy that was used by the American side. America tried to use what was called the safe village policy. The safe village policy, or what was called the hamlet policy, or the villagization. Right, what was this strategy which was called the villagization? What they were doing, they were trying to separate, or they were trying to split in between the guerrillas and the civilians. So what they did was they tried to put civilians in villages, or they tried to put civilians in hamlets, so that they would identify that whoever is not in the village was out of was part of the guerrillas who were fighting them, and they would easily identify and attack them. But however, it did not work well because the guerrillas, remember, the guerrillas were already in the villages by the time they were strategizing such, which would mean that they still would not identify and split the guerrillas from the civilians, due to the fact that the guerrillas were also operating in the villages. And remember, these Viet Cong guerrillas, they were farmers during the day, and they would be guerrillas at night, which would mean that they would go around doing their ordinary business during the day. And during the night, they will strategize on how to do ambushes and attack the American troops. So it did not work, but rather it worked in the favor of the Viet Cong, because they were the ones who wanted to be targeted for attack. But however, the strategy worked in the disadvantage of American side. So they were forced to abandon that strategy. Right, continuing with our discussion, we are measuring on the sides of the US strategies that they tried to use in the Vietnam War. Right, we go on to look at another strategy that was employed by the American side. The Americans, they also used another strategy, which was called the search and destroy, the search and destroy policy, search and destroy, meaning to say they were trying to identify where the guerrillas were so that they would destroy them. And it was also termed the My Lai massacre, the My Lai massacre. That was the other name which was used to refer to the guerrilla, the search and destroy police. We're talking of My Lai massacre. So what happened to that strategy of the My Lai massacre? Was it a success on the side of America? Did they manage to achieve the desired result using the My Lai massacre? Right, that was the strategy, My Lai massacre, right, which was also termed the search and destroy. But what happened with this one? They aimed to identify, they were aiming to identify the guerrillas where they were so that they would target them for destruction. They wanted to identify where the guerrillas were so that they would destroy their base camps. And also, what happened with the effort of identifying such camps for the guerrillas? Did they manage to identify where the guerrillas were? Right. In their attempt to identify such villages, they were confused by the guerrilla tactics. While they are on their way to try and identify where they would find the guerrillas' camps, they were still confused by the tactics that were employed by the guerrillas. Remember, the guerrillas were using several tactics that were non-conventional. So in an attempt to identify them, they were also meshed with confusing factors. Like, for example, there was an effect of what was termed the boob traps. The boob traps, the guerrillas would set what they called the booby traps. Those booby traps were a deterrent to the movement of the American troops in an effort to try and identify the guerrillas. So those booby traps, they would be like a trap which would be set, which would trap and ultimately kill the American soldiers while they were roaming in the jungles trying to identify where to find the guerrillas. So it worked in favor of the guerrillas because they were fighting in absence. They were called the booby traps. So what the booby traps were doing, they were it was like the guerrillas were hidden in the forest fighting, while the booby traps would be working for them, also be fighting on their behalf. The booby traps would trap the American soldiers unaware, and they would be killed by those traps. So in an effort to try and identify the base camps for the guerrillas, they were matched with equally confusing tactics of guerrilla warfare, which were used by the Vietcong guerrillas. So this strategy here did not work because they failed to reap positive results because they could not identify their targets. They could not identify their targeted villages where they would find those guerrillas. So the search and destroy openly failed, and it failed to work in favor of the Americans because they would not identify where the guerrillas were. They failed to get through and get to identify the bases where the guerrillas would be hidden. So it did not work for the Americans. It worked apparently in favor of the Viet Cong. So that was how the strategy failed, which is a search and destroy. Then lastly, we can also look at another strategy which was used by, before we look at the last one, we also need to look at the strategy by America of sending young and inexperienced soldiers. The troops that were sent by America, they were mainly the young and inexperienced ones. They were sparing their experienced troops and decided to send the young soldiers to the war. They were young and inexperienced. Right. What was the motive of sending young and inexperienced soldiers to a war? Remember, a war is not a joking event, but you are seeing America sending inexperienced and very young soldiers to the war. Right. That strategy, they thought it was a walkover. They thought they had already won the war. Given the size and the military strength of Vietnam compared to America, America was a superpower, and it had mighty military power compared to the Vietnam. The Vietnam was just a small nation of peasant farmers. So they thought it was a walkover war. They were definitely going to win that particular war. So that is why they were tempted to send, in the first instance, those young and inexperienced soldiers to the war. But what was the result now that they sent these young and inexperienced soldiers? Because of guerrilla tactics, the young and inexperienced soldiers were heavily defeated. They considered heavy defeats from the Vietcong guerrillas. They were confused by guerrilla tactics. They didn't know how the enemy was attacking them, and they were also attacked by using those unconventional strategies like the booby traps. So at the end, those young and inexperienced soldiers, they lost confidence in the war, and they were acting out of fear wherever they were because they would be attacked out of nowhere, out of surprise. So at the end of the day, we tend to find that those young soldiers, they lost confidence. And if we checked the death toll in the war, it rose sharply. The number of casualties, the number of soldiers who were dying in the war kept on rising because of the guerrilla tactics and because of the inexperience of the soldiers who were sent to wage a war against the guerrillas. So at the end, there was turmoil in the war battlefield because of the rampant loss of life. Those surviving ones, they were scared now to keep continuing with the war, and they lost confidence, and they were now acting out of fear. This apparently demoralized them, and chances of America surviving or chances of their strategies winning the guerrillas became very slim because they were now acting out of fear, and they were now acting without any confidence in the war. So that led to American strategies being made ineffective because of the tactics that the guerrillas are used against America. Then let's go to our last point. Though it's not the conclusive point, though it's not the least point, but we have to conclude by looking at what President Nixon did in 1973. Right. President Nixon was the then president of the US. In 1973, remember in America, there was an outcry. People were demonstrating. The American citizens were demonstrating against the government. They were holding anti-war demonstrations. They were frustrated by the government's involvement in Vietnam. And there were so many lives of Americans that were lost in the war. So they were not happy with the government's actions of involving itself in a foreign country to go and sacrifice the lives of American people for the sake of containing communism. What was it for? So people were so frustrated about the involvement of the government in Vietnam politics. So there was an outcry in America, anti-war demonstrations were held. America's reputation was being tainted bad. Also, America was becoming unpopular, was being criticized. So there was a lot of things happening around the war as it went through. So America, the president who was there by 1973, who was President Nixon, he came out with a policy of strategic withdrawal from Vietnam. He wanted to withdraw from Vietnam strategically. So the strategy of strategic withdrawal was also termed the WHAM, which is in full, it was termed the WHAM. WHAM, which is in full, winning the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese. Winning the hearts and minds of Vietnamese. He wanted to win the hearts now of the Vietnamese. After all these frustrations that the Vietnamese went through, he wanted to strategically now withdraw from the war because he had felt that the war has costed America so much and so many lives had been lost. And it has extended. They thought that the war would end in the shortest possible frame of time, but now the war had extended for long. So he thought of strategically withdrawing. And this withdrawal on its own, it's a signal that the Viet Cong tactics were successful because there's no one who can withdraw from a war without conceding a defeat. It apparently shows that the American strategies were made ineffective by the Viet Cong tactics that they employed in the war. That becomes our last paragraph of the essay, or our last paragraph of our presentation on the essay. Then we go to the conclusion. Remember, a conclusion that you need to produce should be contextualized. You should produce a conclusion which is in context with your discussion. You should produce a conclusion which is in line with the side of your argument. You don't need to waver around and go to the other side of the argument. And also, you don't need to introduce new things in the conclusion. You just need to tie up your points. You just need to have a conclusive statement whereby you tie up conclusively all the points that you were discussing without repeating them as they are in the essay. So in this instance, I can conclude this essay by saying, conclusively, Viet Cong tactics, mainly the non-conventional guerrilla tactics, were undoubtedly very successful in making USA strategies ineffective during the war. USA had to withdraw from the war and considered one of the most embarrassing defeats in its history. I think that can qualify to be a very good conclusive paragraph for such an essay. We have tried to sum up our ideas. We have tried to come out with a conclusive version of the discussion without repeating what we said in the essay as it is, and without introducing a new term, without introducing a new idea. And also the conclusion is within the line of the discussion in the presentation. Right. I think basically that qualifies to be a good essay for this presentation on question number 4, the extension of Cold War. Right. Now let's move quickly to independent Africa, a case study for the Congo. Right. In this discussion, we are going to touch on the key elements which address the question. Given now that I have given you the presentation of the essay, what you are supposed to follow, what you are supposed to abide by. In this essay now, we're just going to focus on the content requirements for the essay, not the details of how you structure the presentation and how you are supposed to make it sound. Because now you know you're supposed to have an introduction, which has got elements that you now know, and you're supposed to have the background information, which you now know, and you're supposed to have the body which you have got paragraphs in Peel method, and you need to have a conclusion. Right. Now we want to focus on question number 5. Mobutu Sese Seko's political, economic, and cultural policies positively transformed a post-independent Congo in the 1960s. Do you agree with this statement? Use relevant evidence to support your line of argument. Right, we mentioned about the nature of the questioning of the essays. This essay is based on agree or disagree. Do you agree? For me, in this instance, given that I know the Congo situation, I tend to disagree with this statement. I will opt to disagree. That is where I have more points to support my argument. If I disagree that the policies that were put in place by Mobutu Sese Seko positively transformed, I would have a valid argument which I can sustain through the discussion. What you need to do here, you need to make a decisive decision before you choose a side to stand on, before you take a stance, or before you adopt a line of argument. Check your points. Check which side are you able to support through the discussion. Because if you choose the wrong side, you will not be able to support your line of argument. Remember, at the end of every point, you need to link it back to the line of argument, which means you will fail now to link or to relate it to the line of argument. Because what you have argued in the presentation won't be agreeing to the fact that you have opted, or want to be agreeing to the stance that we have adopted in the introduction. So what we need to do here, for myself here in this discussion, I will take the negative side. I will disagree. So which will mean that I am saying Mobutu Sese Seko's political and economic cultural policies did not transform or did not positively transform the post-independent Congo. So I'm in disagreement. That is my line of argument. I'm in disagreement with this statement. I'm not agreeing that the policies that he instituted transformed positively the post-independent Congo in the 1960s. Right. Why am I saying so? I will highlight some of the evidences that I'm going to use in the discussion. I will talk of maybe under political. I will highlight that Mobutu created an autocratic state. The creation of an autocratic state is my argument, which I will support, that it was not working in favor of the post-independent Congo. Then on economic, I can point out on kleptocracy as one of his policies that he implemented. He implemented kleptocracy policies. Then on cultural policies, I can mention the authenticite. Those are my arguments which I am going to use in the discussion, and I'm going to support them and show how they failed the transformation of post-independent Congo in my discussion. So in this instance, my introduction has got disagreement. I don't agree with the statement, and I've given historical evidences, and I'll elaborate. This essay will solely be based on the policies that were instituted by Mobutu when he got into power in post-independent Congo in the 1960s. That will be my introduction. Then I got the background information. I don't need to spend much on the background information because much of the background is a familiar background. Right, what you need to note here, we need to note the history of Congo. Congo was under the colonial rule of Belgium, under King Leopold. Right, it was a former colony of European master who is Belgium. Right, I think you can check the European countries, you know, there is Belgium, right? It's Belgium. That was the colonial master. That was the colonial master of Congo, which means before independence, the Congo was being ruled by Belgium and was being led by King Leopold. Right. Then what happened after independence? After the attainment of independence, because we are looking at post-independence in this instance. We are saying after Congo attained independence, it was Mobutu Sese Seko who was a ruler of Congo. How did he manage to transform the politics and the economics of then the social lives of the people in Congo? Was he successful? Did he manage to positively impact on the lives of people in the DRC? Right. We are saying in this instance, it was under the rule of the Belgian. It was the Belgian colony, and was under the leadership of King Leopold, and it got its independence on the 30th of June in 1960. That was when Congo got its sovereignty from the rule of the Belgians. Then what happened after attainment of independence? Who were the leaders? We know that after independence, it was Kasavumbu who was the president of the independent Congo. The guy was called Kasavumbu. And this was the president. And we also had, the government had a prime minister. The prime minister by then was Patrice Lumumba. This was the prime minister of the independent Congo. Then, how then did Mobutu got to power? How did he got to rise to stardom to become the ultimate leader of the independent Congo? Right. We know well that Mobutu did not get power through a democratic election. He got into power through what is called a coup d'etat. Let me indicate how he got into power. Apparently, we are saying Mobutu seized the power. He took power forcibly from the ruling president through using military strength. He used military strength to take over control of Congo. That is what we call a military coup or a coup d'etat. That happened in the year of 1965. That is when he took power from Kasavumbu, and he became the head of state for the Congo people. Right. That is basically the brief background that you need to rely on. You just need to give a brief background of how the Congo politics was like. So now you are seeing the picture. A leader coming into power without a democratic election being held. Could we say, or would we qualify that leader as a legitimate leader for the people? Because he did not get to power out of the people's will. He chose to get into power through a military coup, which is a seizing of power. He used forceful means to get into power. That gives a picture which is blurred. That does give a clear picture of a leader who is democratic and a leader who is after doing people's will or after fulfilling the needs and demands of the people whom he's leading. But after he's only after his self-enrichment, because he forced himself into power. We know presidents should be democratically elected in a sovereign state. But however, he managed to get into power through a coup d'etat. Then let's go to our essay now, given that we have get the introduction and you have had the background information. Now we want to proceed and look at the implications on the politics of Congo and the economics of Congo and the social life of people in Congo. Did he manage to positively impact? I have said in my line of argument, he did not. I disagreed. I disagreed to the fact that he transformed positively, which means whatever I'm going to say, I'm going to elaborate and say how bad it was to the politics of the country and to the economics of the country and to the social lives of people in the particular country, because I've disagreed with the statement which said he impacted positively. Right. Let me go to the politics of Congo. I'll start with the politics. Right. My first point, which I will describe here, or which I will try to create a paragraph based upon, is him getting into power. Mobutu got into power through a coup d'etat or through a military force or through seizure of power from the president. The fact that he got into power through a coup d'etat is a clear indication that he was not the people's choice. Therefore, whatever he was going to do was not after fulfilling the people's demands, was after fulfilling his own demands, because he was not democratically elected. This gives an impression that whatever he was doing was not after transformation of the politics of Congo in a positive way and for the betterment of the people of the Congo, but after his own after his own benefit, or after his own fulfillment of his own needs and wants. So that on its own is a point which qualifies to discriminate the fact that Mobutu positively transformed the post-Congo. The fact that he got into power through a military coup, it gives an impression that he was not the people's choice. So how then would we say someone transformed positively the politics of a country when he got into power through his own means, through his unorthodox means, when he was supposed to get into power through the formal electorate, and through the democratic electorate of the will of the people in that particular country. So it's one valid point which qualifies to disqualify the statement which says the policies were positively transformed post-independent Congo. He did not positively transform because he got into power through a military coup, which is against the people's will. He was not a people's choice. People were supposed to democratically elect the leader whom they want. Then we got the next point. Right. Mobutu managed to create a one-party state within 5 years of him getting into power. What are we calling the one-party state? We are calling a state in which there are no opposition political parties. Mobutu Seko made his party the Popular Movement of the Revolution. He had his political party, which was called the Popular. The party was called the Popular. We are writing it. We are putting it in English, though they were using French. It's presented differently in French. Popular in English, it's Popular Movement. Popular Movement of the Revolution. Right. That's the name of the party in English. But if we are to put it in French, it was MPLA in French. Because remember, the official language which was used, or which is still being used in the Democratic Republic of Congo, is the French language. So this was the political party which was legally recognized in Congo as the one and only political party for the whole politics of the whole country. People were supposed to obey and oblige themselves to the movement, popular movement of the revolution. That was the only legal political party which was allowed to exist during the time of Mobutu. Right. And what happened? We can further elaborate on this. He made it compulsory for all Congolese to join that political party. And he did not hesitate to punish any opposition. He would use different modes of punishment amongst the people who try to oppose the popular movement for the revolution. He would use means like torture. Mobutu was well known for torturing, was well known for executions. This clearly shows that Mobutu did not transform positively the politics of Congo. The fact that he banned other political parties. In a political spectrum, we should allow for democracy. We should allow people to affiliate themselves with the parties of their choice. But given that he has now banned all political parties, then whom are we going to affiliate to, or which leader are we going to choose in case we want to choose a different leader? Now that all the leaders have been made illegal, he has only made one political party to be legal in the whole country. That shows that Mobutu was not it did not positively impact on the post-independent Congo. Rather, he negatively impacted by disallowing or disrespecting the people's right to democracy, the people's right to participation in politics. No one would participate in politics because they were banned. And the only political party which was allowed to survive was his one and his only political party. Then we can also go on to highlight on his creation of an autocratic state. Autocratic state. We are saying here, Mobutu managed to create an autocratic state. Autocratic state. Right, we're not talking of autocracy. We are looking at centralization of power. Centralization of power. We are saying Mobutu had total control. He made he gave himself the total authority over everything happening in the Republic of Congo, which meant that all decisions were centralized upon him. He was the one who had sole right to decide on everything happening, whether economical, political, social, whatever. He had the spectrum to control all the dimensions of people's lives, which is not good for the benefit of ordinary citizens. What if you become stupid and make wrong decisions? How are they going to impact on the ordinary citizen? In case you make wrong decisions, you are centralizing decision-making. You don't allow for the contributory decision-making. You don't allow for people contributing towards your decision-making. You don't have people whom you consult in decision-making. That creation of an autocratic state, we can actually criticize it as bad politics. We need democracy. We need contribution of ideas from different perspectives. We need different political parties to contribute towards the attainment of positive political goals in the economy and in the country at large. But he chose not to do that. He chose to be a central power. He chose to centralize all the authority upon himself, which indicates that whatever he was doing was not for the good of the people. What if he made wrong decisions? Were they going to be criticized? Who was going to criticize that? So we can argue that Mobutu failed by creating an autocratic state. It did not work in favor of the people of Congo. It did not work in the favor of the politics of Congo, but rather it did more evil than good for the people of Congo. Right. We can go to the next point, whereby we can say Mobutu created a cult. which was termed Mobutuism. Right. Let me indicate here. We are talking of a personal cult. He created a personal cult, which was termed Mobutuism. Right. Let me indicate here. Right. We are talking of the formation of, he created a cult, which was called Mobutuism. Right. What to call a cult here? We are looking at a situation whereby a leader tries to have an overall impression over the control of everything that happens in the country by giving people's impression that he has ultimate power, or is the one who has been appointed, or who has the total authority to decide over the lives of people in the country, and would make people believe in him in whichever dimension, and would want to make people think that he's the rightful person to have authority over them. That was the creation of a cult. He was created a cult of Mobutuism amongst the people of Congo. He wanted the people of Congo to praise him. People would praise him in song. People would praise him in poetry. People would praise him in all dimensions of their life. They would praise him in dance. They would praise him. So he made people believe in him in such a way that he was treated as a mean god of the people of Congo. He was treated as the earthly god of the people of Congo. Would we say that is good? If we were to check on that, people need to have liberty. People need to affiliate themselves with whoever they want, not to follow a cult, which was instilled upon them, which was tried to enforce upon them. So it did not work well for the politics of people, the politics of the people of Congo, because it denied them the right to diversity. They were rather supposed to oblige the cult which was upon them. They were supposed to worship Mobutu in whatever dimension, in whatever piece, or in whatever their dimension of life, whether social, whether economic, whether political, whether whichever, or even in their love life. They have to remember that there was Mobutu for them. There was Mobutu who was the main god who was placed on earth for them. So that being it on its own, you can clearly see the picture that it's not a good picture in the politics of an economy, in the politics of a country, to have someone being praised by all the people in the country, not out of their own will, but sometimes out of the fear of the power that is vested in him. Remember, he was a dictator for that matter. Right. Then we can talk of Mobutu being a dictator as another point. It's also a point which we can try to play around with. Mobutu became a dictator due to the fact that he banned other political parties and he did not allow for any opposition. He would not hesitate to punish any opposition. He became a totalitarian leader over the peoples of Congo, the people of Congo. He became a dictator. And you know, a dictator just makes decisions without consultation. And that is to the detriment of the good of the people in a particular country. Like basically, that's the picture of the politics of Congo and how you can criticize them. We are looking at the negative implication on the politics of Congo, which were put in place by the reign of Mobutu into the throne of the Congo country. Right. Then we can go to economic. Right. The economics of Congo, remember, the economy was controlled by the Belgians. But when they got independence, initially he left the economy in the hands of the whites and the foreigners. But later on, he chose to nationalize those businesses and those mines. Remember, Congo is very rich in minerals. The Katanga area is an area which is very rich in mineral resources. So initially, when he got independence, he left those resources in the hands of the whites and in the hands of foreign investors. But however, later, he chose to nationalize those resources. Right. Let's look at the policies that he implemented on the economic side of Congo. There was a policy which we are going to start with here. Though we might not exhaust all the points, I'll just try to highlight on the key points that I think maybe matter much. But it does not mean that we have exhausted everything. Right. There was what was called Zaireization. Right. Zaireization. Right. What kind of policy was this? The policy which was termed Zaireization. Right. What he did here with this policy, he tried to replace skilled people with locals. Skilled foreign people were replaced. And those skilled foreign people in strategic positions, like for example, those who were leading companies, the directorship of companies were replaced. And he replaced them with the local people. He wanted to please his local people. Zaireization, the term Zaire is from the name which he gave to the republic after independence. So Zaireanization, he wanted everything to be Zaired or whichever way. He wanted everything to be in the Zaire form, in the form of the indigenous people. So he wanted to try to please the local people by giving them positions. So what he did, he replaced the skilled people in industry, in commerce, in whichever field, in politics. He replaced them with the people who were local. And those people, mind you, they were not experienced to hold those positions. And as a result, there was a turmoil in running those institutions. You put someone to the directorship of a big organization and they don't even have a matric certificate. Would you think the organization will still be viable? Instead, they will employ tactics to embezzle funds. They will employ tactics to do corrupt acts, to feed their own pockets at the expense of the organization. So as a result of this Zaireanization, the economy of Congo went down. Production levels went down. Unemployment started to rise. Prices started to rise, which is to the detriment of the good of the economy. If prices are rising, it's an indicator that it's bad economics. If there is rise of unemployment, it's an indicator of bad economics. If GDP levels are falling, productivity is falling day by day, it's an indicator that the economy is failing. So Zaireanization is a clear failure on the economy of Congo. It produced negative results on the people of Congo because prices started to rise, the GDP of the country that started to get lower, unemployment levels are started to increase, which is a clear indication that the economic policy which he instituted failed, did not realize any positive result. Then we can go on to some of his policies that he was implementing. We want to highlight on the policy of kleptocracy, right? Is one of the major policies that we need to discuss here, right? The policy was called kleptocracy, right? Let me indicate it here. Okay, kleptocracy. Right, what was this? This policy was a self-enriching strategy that he thought of. It was a policy of self-enrichment for himself and his immediate friends and immediate family members. What did he do? He put those immediate members, he gave them the most preferences, like in running organization, in controlling mines, in running prominent businesses, in taking state contracts. They were the ones who were given those privileges. Himself and his close members of the family and close friends were the ones who were getting those privileges through his kleptocracy measure. And as a result, kleptocracy created a very wide discrepancy in income distribution and wealth amongst the Congolese. There was a group of elite people who were himself and his immediate friends and immediate family members. They got so rich, but the general populace of the Congo people suffered. They did not benefit anything from the state resources because the resources were being channeled towards an elite group of his close friends and his close immediate family members. So that created a disparity in income distribution, which is not good for the economy. Remember, every economy seeks to achieve equitable income distribution. We tend to distribute our income fairly amongst all citizens in the country. That is why the government is trying to tax the rich and try to give a part of the tax monies to the poor through the grants and the transfer payments and all those forms of payments which are given to the poor. We are trying to redistribute income by taking from the rich and giving to the poor. But Mobutu apparently did the opposite. He was taking from the poor and giving to the rich, such that he created a group of an elite there was a group of elite people who were very rich, which he created. And himself was also one of the people. He was worth billions of United States dollars because of the kleptocracy policy that he instituted. So we can say it was a self-enriching economic policy that he put in place. Then we can also talk of other negative implications like corruption and mismanagement. There was rampant corruption in Congo because of him centralizing authority. The people whom he gave authority to control businesses, to control mines, to take care of state resources, they were doing corruption. They were so corrupt. And there was also rampant mismanagement and theft. People were stealing state resources for their own benefit. They were externalizing state funds for the sake of their own benefit, such that at the end, there was wide disparity in income distribution and there was high levels of poverty amongst the Congolese people. The ordinary citizen suffered to the last extent because of corruption, nepotism, and mismanagement. We can also talk of nepotism and elitism. Yes, they relate to that. Nepotism, we are saying he was giving preference to his close family members. Whatever was available, if it is a control of mine, he would give it to his immediate brother. What if it's there? If it's the control of a major business or taking of a state, so be it maybe a state offer, which a state tender, he would give it to his immediate family member. That is nepotism. So at the end, it was Mobutu here, Mobutu there, Mobutu there. This business is Mobutu, this one is Mobutu, this one is Mobutu. So that at the end of the day, you tend to find that it was only his family and his immediate family members who were so rich at the expense of the rest of the economy. So economically, if you were to look at it, you can see the picture that Mobutu did more harm than good to the economy of Congo by him coming into power after attaining independence. Then we can conclude the economic part by looking at him. He was forced to reintroduce what we call retrocession. He was forced because of the economic situation. The inflation levels went as high as of 100%. Unemployment doubled. The situation was not good. So what he thought was like, these people, he now got a clear picture of what was wrong with the economy. He saw that the people whom he was giving preference were betraying him and were not working for the good of the economy, but for their own good. So he decided to call back the people who were previous owners of those businesses, the previous owners of the mines, the whites whom he chased away. Remember, he chased them without compensation. When he took over, when he nationalized the businesses, he chased them without compensation. So those guys were frustrated. They had worked for years for their businesses. They had worked for years establishing their mines, but they were chased without any compensation. So calling them back, it was a very difficult task. If someone is chased out of their original position without any compensation, they won't trust you in future. So the result was those guys, they refused the offers. They did not take those offers to come back, given that he wanted them to come back and reclaim their businesses and make them viable again. So most of them, they did not come. It was only a few who came, which meant that the economic situation persisted as bad as it was. It did not improve by him trying to call back, to reclaim, to apparently retrocise the investors who were previously the owners of the businesses and the mines. It failed, which meant the economy continued working as bad as it was. And as a result, the economy collapsed. And in the end, he was only dependent on foreign aid. He was depending on support from countries outside, was depending on support from multilateral international organizations like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, those are multilateral, the United Nations, those multilateral international organizations. But if you can check the resources of Congo, Congo is blessed with resources, which meant that it was not supposed even at an extent to rely on foreign aid, given the resources that it has. So it's a clear indication that economically, whatever policy Mobutu tried to put was a failure. The economy went down, unemployment soared, levels of inflation went as high as above 100%. There was very extreme high levels of poverty. There was extreme income inequality. The GDP of the economy went to as low as the lowest possible expected. The exchange rate, they were not in favor of the Congo economy. Everything, resources were embezzled. Which gave the Congo economy have a persistent balance of payment problems. So we can highlight all those economic problems as an indicator that whatever policy Mobutu put in place did not work in favor of the economy of the Congo, but apparently against the economy of Congo. Right. Let's go to the cultural. On cultural here, I want to focus on just a few aspects. On cultural, we're looking at how the culture of people was transformed with him coming into power. The major component that we want to talk about here, I'm going to talk about the police that he instituted, which he called the authenticite. Right, authenticite, we are looking at a term which is derived from the word authentic. And authentic, we are looking at something which is genuine. Right, what is it which is genuine, which he wanted to put in place in the social lives of people? What is it, the authenticite that he was talking about? What is it which was not genuine, which he wanted to change to make it genuine for the social lives of people of Congo? Right, what Mobutu did when he got into power, he introduced what was called the authenticite. What kind of a policy was that? He felt like the Congo was affiliated more to the Western world, was affiliating more to the Western ideas. So he wanted to change the ideology of Congo and make them more African. He wanted to Africanize the ideology of Congo and the way of doing things in the Republic of Congo. So what he did, he tried to institute several moves to implement changes amongst the Congolese people, to try and change their way of thinking, to try and change their way of doing things so that they become more African. They become more African and they do not affiliate more to the West. So what he did now was he forced people to change their their religious names into authentic African names. The Congolese people, much of them were Christians. They had Christian names, the likes of Mary, the likes of Joseph, the likes of whoever. They had Christian names, which they had adopted because of their religion. So he made people change those names and adopt more authentic African names. That was one of the moves which falls under authenticide. And he himself acted as an example in that move. Remember, he was called Joseph Desire Mobutu. And he even renamed himself to give a testimony of him wanting to authenticize or to give a genuine feel of Congo being an African nation. He changed his name from Joseph Desire to Mobutu Sese Kokungu Ntegu Nazabangu. It's a very long name, which is even difficult to pronounce, but it's in the native language of the Congolese people. Mobutu Sese Kokungu Begu Nazabangu. That was his authentic name that he even gave to himself to show that he wanted people to be more African and not affiliate to the West. Then in the other move, he also changed names of cities and towns in the Republic of Congo. He wanted those names to be changed because remember those names had acquired colonial names from the Belgians. Much of them, they had names of Belgian prominent figures. So he opted to change those names of the cities and towns. We can mention one example of the major cities, which was transformed from a colonial name to a more authentic African name. He changed the name of Leopoldville. Leopoldville, a city in the Republic of Congo, which was named Leopoldville in honor of King Leopold, who was the Belgian king, right? It was named Leopoldville, like Leopoldville, like that. It was authenticized to Kinshasa. That was the move that he made to change the name of the major city, the capital city of the country, from Leopoldville. We are worshiping the whites here. We are worshiping King Leopold, who's Belgian. We should make this authentic because it's not genuine. Let's make it Kinshasa, which is more authentic, which is more African. And also the name of the country itself, remember it was called Congo. He renamed it to Zaire, which is more authentic. That was his ideology. He wanted to identify himself as African, as more authentic, as more genuine, not as a fake one who is affiliating to the West. So he wanted to be more authentic. He changed the names of people. He forced people to change their Christian names to adopt more authentic names. He himself, he led by example by changing his name from Desire Mobutu Sese Seko to the longest name ever possible, which is more authentic according to his way of thinking. Then he also changed names of cities. Leopoldville was changed to Kinshasa. The Congo itself as a country was changed to Zaire. That was his authenticide policy. Would we say this is good? The criticism is this is against humanity. How would you force a person to change their identity? How would you force a person to change their name, which they had adopted because of their affiliation to their religion? You force them to adopt an authentic name. How authentic is authentic? That's the question. But these people were affiliating to their religion. They were identifying themselves with the Christianity religion, and they had given themselves their names, their religious names out of their own will. But someone comes and says, your names are not authentic, they're not genuine, we should change them. It's a clear indication that he was against humanity. That is against humanity. It's against the will of the people to forcibly change someone's names and also to change names of cities. People were affiliating themselves with those cities using the old names, and apparently he made them changed. That was not good again for the sake of the people and their interaction with places and whatever. So we can criticize him for that authenticide using that argument. It's not a good move that he made for social lives of people in Congo, right? And also we can talk of Mobutu maintaining French as the official language of instruction. Right, Mobutu maintained French language as the language of instruction. We are seeing him adopting authenticide. He was saying the local names are not authentic, they're not genuine. But why didn't he change the official language into the authentic language? He failed to do so, which is a criticism. He failed to change the official language, the official learning language of the country into a local language which is understandable and which can be effectively used by ordinary citizens. But rather, he kept on adopting the French language as the language of instruction. We are saying the language used in teaching and learning in schools. They still continue to using French as the language of teaching in schools and institutions of learning. So which is a clear indication that he failed to transform the social lives of people. People need to use their own local languages so that they affiliate themselves with their, and they also be familiar, or they also be able to communicate effectively. You know, mother language is more efficient when it comes to communication, but he failed to do so. He still maintained the colonial language of instruction, which is French. And also, let's check on education. What did he do to education? Right. Mobutu did not do much transformation to the education of Congo. He failed to transform the education of Congo. Right. What happened usually was the education favored the elite. The education was not for everyone. The education favored the elite. It was the rich people who had access to quality and good education. Education was for the elite. We are looking at the group of rich people, prominent rich people here, who are the ones who were able to access education, and predominantly those who were in urban areas. It was mainly for those in urban areas who could afford, because also remember, the government failed to continue funding education. They failed to continue subsidizing education, and they made parents pay for their kids' education. And given the economic situation, people were in very extreme levels of poverty. They could not fund for their own kids' education. As a result, most of the kids, they withdrew from school. They could not keep on going to school because of the effect of them having to pay school fees. So it's an indication that he failed to transform the social lives of people because he failed to fund completely for the education of his own very people. And lastly, we are going to look at him, his thoughts of democracy. His ideology of democracy. Mobutu thought that democracy was something from the West. He did not think that democracy was to be upheld by Africans. He thought that democracy was a thing of the West. That is why we saw him, if you see the impression of him, he was wearing the traditional attire whenever he was doing his official political business. He wanted to affiliate himself with the African tradition, and he was believing that democracy was not part of the African beliefs. So it's a clear indication that if a leader is not after democracy, then is against the people. So to sum up, we can say Mobutu social, economic, and political policies completely failed to give any positive transformation on the economy of Congo after attaining independence in 1960. Rather, he worsened the political situation. The political terrain was worsened by him being a dictator and disallowing opposition and torturing and using forms of physical violence amongst people who wanted to show opposition to his rulership. So that's the picture of the essay. If you were to argue in favor of the statement, I don't know how you're going to support, because when you are talking of Congo, the results were visibly negative. If you check the history of Congo, everything went into turmoil, everything went to its knees. The economy went to its knees because of Mobutu's economic policies. The political terrain was not in favor of opposition, which is also not good. The social lives of people were not transformed because of him getting into power. So overall, that's the impression of that particular essay. Right, I think for now I can conclude till we meet in other discussion. That's our Conrad Mupinguri. Thank you. Right. Good afternoon, students. This is Conrad Mupinguri. We are having a memo discussion on history paper 1. We will be based on the essay questions. I'm going to take you through the discussion for question number 4, the extension of Cold War, which is a case study of Vietnam. Right. The question, we have to analyze the question first before we go into the possible solutions to the question. Right. The question says, the tactics used by the Viet Cong were successful in making USA strategies ineffective during the Vietnam War between 1963 and 1975. Critically discuss this statement and use a relevant historical evidence to support your line of argument. Right. What happens with this is a question. It's a question that requires you to critically discuss. Right. And before we go into that particular question, remember we have three types of questioning which are used for history essay questions. Right. One type of questioning which is used is that of do you agree? You are given a historical statement, then the question says, do you agree with the statement? Use relevant evidence to support your line of argument. What you need to do with that essay is you need to adopt a line of argument which is either you are agreeing to the given historical statement or you are in disagreement to the given historical statement. Then as you go through your essay, you have to now support your line of argument. Support as to why you are agreeing to the statement or indicate as to why you disagreed with the given historical statement. That is one type of question that is used. Then the other question that is used in assessing history questions, essay questions, is that of to what extent. What you need to do with that particular question, which is asking about the extent. You are given a historical expression, and to what extent did this contribute to this? You have to adopt a line of argument by indicating a greater extent to where it's inclined towards, where there are more facts, that's a greater extent, and to a lesser extent on the side which has got less historical facts. Then let's come to our question number 4. The question says, critically discuss this statement and use relevant historical evidence to support your line of argument. Right, what we need to do here, we need to critically discuss the fact that the tactics that were used by Viet Cong were successful in making USA strategies ineffective. So we know well from the results of the Vietnam War that America ultimately was forced to withdraw from that war. So it's clear that whatever strategy was used by Viet Cong was successful, because at the end of the war, it was Viet Cong that won that particular war. And on the side of America, it shows that whatever was used by America as a fighting strategy in the war was ineffective. And who made it ineffective were the Viet Cong tactics that they used. So in this instance, we have to agree, we have to approve, because with a critical discussion question, either you need to approve the historical statement given, or we need to disapprove the historical statement. So in this instance, when we are approving a historical statement, we are saying the statement given in the question, the leading statement given in the question, we are approving it, we are saying it's historically correct. If you are disapproving, we are saying that statement is historically wrong. It cannot be supported by historical facts. So in this instance, we are adopting a line of argument which is approving that particular statement. So we are in line with the fact that the tactics that were used by Viet Cong were successful in making USA strategies ineffective during the Vietnam War of 1963 to 1975. All right. Then remember, when you are introducing your essay has to have the components that are required in a history essay. You need to have a line of argument. You need to adopt a stance. Adopt a stance, show your side of the argument. So in this instance, our side of the argument, we have chosen to approve the statement. We are saying that statement is historically correct. And also, we need to give some reasons, or we need to highlight some historical evidence as to why we are saying that statement, we are approving it. Why did we choose to approve that? We need to give a highlight of evidence, of historical evidence. We need to highlight some sort of pieces of agreement to the fact that we are approving that historical statement. Then we need to orient the reader of the essay. Remember, an essay is a presentation. We are presenting some written historical facts to the reader. We need to orient them. They need to know the direction which the essay is going. What should they expect in the presentation? what is to be presented in the essay. So in this instance, a possible introduction which can be used for this particular essay. I'm not limiting it to what I'm presenting here, but a possible presentation of an introduction of this essay could be something like the tactics used by the Viet Cong were indeed successful in making USA strategies ineffective during the Vietnam War between 1963 and 1975. The Viet Cong made use of strategies of tactics such as the guerrilla warfare, the underground tunnels, the use of neighboring countries, the Tet offensive, amongst other non-conventional strategies. This presentation will examine how Vietnam tactics weakened USA strategies during the war. I think we have addressed the basic components which are required in an introduction. We have adopted a line of argument. We have shown our side of the argument. We are approving the statement that the tactics that were used by Viet Cong were successful and they made USA strategies ineffective. And we have given a reason as to why we are saying that. We have given some pieces of historical evidence. We have highlighted some pieces of historical evidence on the tactics that were used by the Viet Cong. The tactics which we have mentioned here, we have mentioned the use of guerrilla warfare tactics, and we have also mentioned the use of underground tunnels. We've also mentioned the use of neighboring countries, and we have also mentioned the Viet Cong using the Tet offensive as some of the tactics that were used or were employed in the Vietnam War. And we have actually given an orientation to the reader what they should expect in the essay, what the essay is solely based upon, what the essay is going to elaborate on. We have shown them that the essay will examine how Vietnam tactics weakened USA strategies during that particular war. Then that will be with the introduction. And remember, after the introduction, you are advised, or rather, you are mandated to give a brief background. Remember, in history, for one to understand the series of events, they need to have a brief background of what was happening before the event which we are to elaborate on. How was the situation like? What was the situation? What was the prevailing situation? And what were the prevailing conditions which led to the events which we want to elaborate on through history of time? So in this instance, our history is traced back to the Cold War, because this essay is solely based upon the extension of Cold War. So our background information is based upon the ideology of the Cold War. Right. I'm taking you back briefly to the ideas of Cold War. We all know that the world was divided via economic ideologies. And the economic ideologies were, one, the ideology of communism and the ideology of capitalism. Countries were grouped according to those two ideologies. So we tended to find that it created tension amongst countries. There was tension which was widespread, which was globally spread, based on the two economic ideologies of communism and capitalism. And that was also the situation in Vietnam. Our Vietnam as a nation, it was divided into two. The division being based on the economic ideologies of communism and the economic ideology of capitalism. That was the basis of the split of Vietnam into two, the North Vietnam and the South Vietnam. And also the history of Vietnam, we know that Vietnam was previously colonized by France. It was under the colonial rule of France, under the French colonial rule. And this war between this war that we're talking about, it was fought between the communists and North. The Northern Vietnam division was following communist ideas, and the Southern Vietnam was following the capitalistic ideas. And we know well that basing on the ideology of Cold War, there were countries who were inclined to the communism ideology. And the notable leaders who were perpetrating the communist ideology were the Soviet Union, which is the USSR, the current Russia, and China. Those countries, they were backing the North Vietnam. because it was a communist country. And the South was supported by the United States of America. The United States was following the ideology of capitalism. Right. So the North Vietnam had a communist government. And that communist government, what was its aim? It sought to unify the country under a single communist regime. They wanted communism to spread to the South. They did not want this division of North Vietnam and South Vietnam. They wanted their ideology to be spread and to go to the South, so that the South also gets incorporated into the ideology of communism. That was their ideology of the government in the North. And what was the ideology on the South? Right. The other side, which was the southern side, was anti-communist. They were against communism ideas. They were rather inclined to the communist, to the capitalistic ideology. They were inclined to the West, which was based on capitalistic ideas. So this government in the South Vietnam, they fought to keep this southern Vietnam, more closely aligned to the West. They wanted to incline whatever they were doing to the West because they had the ideology of capitalism. So they were inclining themselves towards the West, and they inclined themselves with America. So given this situation that there was tension between the North and the South because of economic ideology of capitalism and communism, America got involved in this particular dispute between the North and the South. And what was the reason behind America getting involved in a foreign country's politics, in the affairs of a foreign nation? What was the rationale? What was the benefit of America getting involved in Vietnam, which is a foreign country? Why was it so interested in the politics of Vietnam? Right. The Americans, they were following an idea which is known as the domino theory. The domino theory. Right. What were the US leaders believing? Basing on the domino theory, their ideology that they were following, that they were believing in. They believed that if Vietnam becomes a communist country, it would lead to the fall of neighboring countries to the communists. That was the domino theory. They believed that if the whole of Vietnam becomes a communist country, then other neighboring countries will follow suit. They will also attract themselves to Vietnam ideology, and they will also be anti-capitalist. They will become communist countries. That was the domino theory. So America got interested for the sake of the ideology that if this North manages to influence the South, then the whole of Vietnam becomes a communist state. Then the result will be neighboring countries would also follow suit and become communist. And then remember, these were hostile camps. The camp of capitalism versus the camp of communism. So it was a matter of attracting countries towards your camp so that you gain more strength. You get more strength by attracting more participants into your camp. So America was so interested in attracting participants into its camp. So it wanted to avoid this influence of North Vietnam spreading communist ideas to South and apparently incorporating the South into its ideology of communism. So their proclamation, what they claimed, the Americans, they deemed that they wanted to save Vietnam from the evils of communism. They were regarding communism as an evil. So they apparently wanted to save the South from the evils of communism. They did not want communism to spread so that it keeps on adopting a capitalistic or an anti-communist ideology. That was the ideology behind. So basically, you can highlight or play around with that as the background information. We now have the rationale. We now know what was there in Vietnam, how the Vietnam's political situation was like, how the Vietnam economic ideologies which were adopted were looking like, and apparently the rationale of America getting involved in the war in Vietnam. In as much as we cannot exhaust everything, but I think that will qualify to be your background information. Remember, after the introduction, you are mandated to give a brief background. You just highlight some brief historical facts which happened and which will help the reader have a clear understanding of what you're going to elaborate in the essay as it goes. So in this instance, we are saying that is the brief background that we can highlight on this essay, question number 4, on the extension of Cold War in Vietnam. Right. Then when we are now doing our essays, remember our essay structure. When we are attacking the question, we're now answering the question, we should stick to the PEEL strategy of answering history questions. What is the PEEL? I think you are aware of it. The PEEL is an abbreviation with a P, E, E, and L. Right. The P, it means a point. What is a point? A point, you are looking at a historical fact which is answering the given question. So when you are constructing your paragraphs in the essay, ensure that the opening statement of your paragraph has got a valid point which is answering the question. Ensure that in the very first opening statement of your paragraph, there is a point. There is an answer to the question. Then the E, which comes after the P in PEEL, the E represents an explanation. What is an explanation? You are elaborating on the given point. You are giving further details on the given point. You are expanding the points and giving a clear understanding to the reader of what the point is all about. That is an explanation which comes after identifying the point. Then we have PEE. The second E in PEEL, meaning that you should give evidence. Give historical evidence to substantiate your explanation. To make your explanation tangible, we need some pieces of historical evidence. What are you supposed to use as piece of historical evidence when you are elaborating in your essay? The piece of historical evidence come in different dimensions. Maybe, for example, you are talking about these strategies by these are tactics by Vietcong. Maybe you're talking about a particular tactic that was used by the Vietcong. You know the particular year when it was instituted, when they implemented that tactic. That qualifies to be a historical evidence. This tactic was implemented on the 1st of June, 1964. It's a historical evidence. Or if you have statistics of casualties in the war, or you have statistics of people who died in a particular event in the war, so many civilians were massacred by the bombing by America using the Rolling Thunder operation. That is historical evidence. You are substantiating your explanation by giving tangible evidence, which is historical, to support your explanation. That is the second P in PEEL. Then the L, which is the last L letter of the PEEL, at the end of your paragraph, in the description, in the ongoing of your presentation in your essay, ensure that there is a linking statement. A linking statement, we are referring back to our line of argument. You are trying to link whatever you have explained in that paragraph, and you are relating it back to the line of argument that you have adopted in the introduction. Like, for example, in this instance, we have said that the tactics that were used by Vietcong were indeed successful. So after explaining a given tactic and after giving evidence, show us how that tactic was effective and how it made American strategies fail, how it made American strategies ineffective in the war. You are going back, or you are referring back to your line of argument, which means it's a supporting statement at the end of the paragraph. And you should ensure that you keep supporting your line of argument so that your argument doesn't waver around. You need to have a side when you are arguing. You need to have a stance. You need to have a standpoint from which you are arguing from. So for you to maintain the standpoint, ensure that at the end of every description, at the end of every explanation to a point, go back to your line of argument. Try to link back to the fact that we have approved the statement. In this instance, we have approved that the strategies by Vietcong were very successful in limiting the strategies by USA. So we should go back to the statement and refer it back, link it back to your line of argument. Right. Let's do it by elaboration rather than just talking. Right. In this instance here, this essay is not limited only to the tactics used by Vietcong, because this is a war. Remember, in a war, we have two sides. The winning of one side is the usefulness of its strategies or its tactics. And the losing of the other side is the weakness of its strategies. So in as much as we are praising the winner, we cannot also ignore the fallbacks of the loser because it acted in favor of the winner. It's like in a match. If you win a match, it means you implemented successful strategies. But in as much as you have won, you were also utilizing the weakness of your opponent. So in this instance, we are saying, in as much as Vietcong tactics were successful, we should also look on the other side of America. How ineffective were American strategies? What they used in the war, it made them lose the war, which meant that it was ineffective. But we should also try to highlight how ineffective were the strategies of America. How were they made ineffective by the tactics that were used by the Vietcong? So in this instance, what I advise you to do when you are attacking your essay question, I advise you to start with the historical evidence that you have highlighted in your introduction. Since you have highlighted some facts in the introduction, you can refer back to those highlighted facts or historical evidences that you have used as reasons to why you have adopted a line of argument in that direction. You can start by using those ones in constructing your paragraphs. Right. Let me give you a sample paragraph which talks about the Vietcong are using guerrilla warfare tactics. Right. The Vietcong are used guerrilla warfare tactics. This is an opening statement. It's a point for my paragraph. I have indicated that the Vietcong used the guerrilla warfare tactics. Then I go on to explain what is it that we call guerrilla warfare? What is involved in this form of fighting? Guerrilla warfare is a form of fighting which is non-conventional. It involves hit and run tactics. Vietcong guerrillas would attack from unknown angles and would disappear. This is, we are developing the guerrilla warfare tactic. We are trying to highlight what guerrilla warfare tactics are. We are trying to give more details or to shed more light as to what guerrilla warfare tactics are. We are explaining them as non-conventional warfare strategies. Remember, we have conventional and we have non-conventional tactics. What we call conventional is something which is common, something which is commonly used, something which is well known, something which is from the book. That is conventional. Which means when we're talking of conventional warfare, we are talking of using strategies which are known. You are fighting your opponent using strategies which are common, which are known. We are using fighting strategies and tactics which are known. Like, for example, we are using bombing. Bombing is a well-known fighting strategy. It's known in almost all warfares. We have prescribed bombs which are used in wars. We know that bombing is a tactic which is used. And also having a defined size of the troops. We know that each country has got a size of non-soldiers who fight using formal tactics which are conventional. That is conventional warfare. So in this war, America was using conventional warfare, was using tactics which are known and had a prescribed size of the army. He had known size of troops, he had a known number of troops, which is conventional. But for the side of the Vietcong, they were using non-conventional strategy. They were tactics. They were using non-conventional tactics, which meant that whatever they were doing, it was not according to the book. They were using tactics which were unfamiliar to the Americans. They were employing new tactics and bushy tactics that were unknown. Like this guerrilla warfare involved ambushing. Ambushing, you attack your enemy from an unknown angle. You hide, then you attack them unprepared for a fight. Or you hide and you attack them with an unknown with unknown methods of attacking and from an unknown angle. Then after that, you disappear. You don't have to face the enemy. You don't have to steer face-to-face confrontation with your enemy, but rather you attack them from unknown angles and you disappear. So this strategy here, as we are analyzing it, we are seeing that America was not familiar with the unconventional strategies of fighting. This non-conventional, which was employed by the Viet Cong, which is the guerrilla warfare. So the ultimate result is certain. Because of this guerrilla warfare, and because these Americans were unfamiliar with this form of fighting, they got so scared in the war because they didn't know when the enemy was going to attack them, when the enemy was coming from. And which meant whatever tactic, whatever strategy that they were going to use became ineffective because the soldier had lost confidence in the war. They didn't know when the enemy was going to attack them and where the enemy was coming from because they were ambushing and attacking them from unknown angles, which will also mean that it assisted in the fall of strategies by the US. And we have given an explanation to the guerrilla warfare. And when we are now linking our paragraph to the line of argument, we want to relate the guerrilla warfare to the fact that it was successful and it also contributed towards the ineffectiveness of American strategies. We can link it by a statement like, fear was instilled amongst the American troops since they didn't know when the enemy was to attack them and how the enemy was going to attack them. And as a result, they lost confidence in the war, resulting in the ineffectiveness of their strategies in the Vietnam War. You see how we are going back to our line of argument. We are giving a concluding statement in a paragraph which is linking back to the fact that the Viet Cong strategies were successful and they led to the ineffectiveness of strategies by the USA. So we need to maintain that presentation for every paragraph. Ensure that every paragraph abides by the PIL format. It has a point, you explain that particular point by shedding more light, you try to identify historical evidence, and you give a statement which refers back to your stance, to your line of argument, to your side of the argument of the story. Right, let's go to another strategy. We can talk of the Viet Cong using underground tunnels. Right, in this instance, in this paragraph, let me present my opening a statement for the paragraph. Underground tunnels were dug by the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War as an aid towards their fighting tactics. The tunnels that were dug, they had kitchens in within, they also had clinics, and they had built-in stores for arms and armaments. The tunnels ensured that the Viet Cong had adequate food supplies and medication, and also had adequate supply of weapons during the ongoing of the war. The tunnels that they dug, they were also narrow to fit the body sizes of the Viet Cong and not to accommodate the American soldier bodies. Tunnels as long as 250 kilometers were dug during the Vietnam War. The tunnels provided a safe hiding place, hence the USA could not easily attack them, and therefore their fighting strategies were ineffective. I think that is a typical complete paragraph which is explaining the usage of underground tunnels by the Viet Cong. We have seen that there is a point which is explaining the digging of tunnels. They were using a tactic of digging underground tunnels. And what were those tunnels for? The tunnels were used to hide. They would hide in those tunnels during the war. And what else was incorporated in the tunnels? The tunnels had got kitchens within them, which meant that they had constant supply of food during the war. They would go into the tunnels to feed and go out to fight. And also within the same tunnels, they were acting as clinics which meant that those soldiers who were injured during the war, those wounded soldiers, would be taken to the tunnels for treatment and would recover and go back to war. And also, in addition to the clinics, the tunnels also were acting as armament stores. They would store their arms and armaments, their weapons in the tunnels, which will also mean that it was an advantage to the side of Vietcong. That digging of tunnels was to their advantage because they would get adequate food supplies, which would energize them and make them keep stronger for the fight. And also they would get medicated in case of the soldiers, the guerrillas getting sick or the guerrillas getting wounded in the war or getting injured by any incidents in the war. They would go to the tunnels for medication and they would recover and still go back to the battlefield. And in addition, they would also use those tunnels to store their arms and armaments. They would store their fighting equipment in the tunnels, which meant that they would have constant supply of the arms and armaments to make them fit and keep fighting the American troops during the ongoing of the war. And we have further elaborated that the tunnels were not only for hiding, but they were made in a specific way. Remember, if you are hiding in a place which the enemy has seen, they can follow you there and still attack you. So how did they design the tunnels? They designed them strategically in such a way that the tunnels were narrow enough to allow only the Vietcong bodies of their soldiers to fit in. Remember, these two extreme countries, the Vietnam was a poor country. Was basically a poor country of peasant farmers. So the average bodies of the Vietcong guerrillas was below average. They were just small bodied. But the American soldiers were big. They were huge and they were heavily bodied. So which meant that they tried to restrict the size of the tunnel such that it would only allow the fitting of the Vietcong guerrillas and disallow the fitting of the American troops. So they were clever enough to design such such tunnels in such a way that it could only accommodate themselves and not the enemy. Then we are also giving historical evidence of the length of the typical tunnels that were dug. That is substantiating our explanation. And we are linking back to our line of argument. We are supporting that the tunnels, they were effective. They were so effective and they made the US strategies ineffective. Imagine if the US would opt to use a bombing as a fighting strategy. You won't bomb someone who is underground, which means that the bombing would become ineffective because you're trying to bomb someone who is hidden from underground. So it meant that it weakened the side of American strategies. It made American strategies ineffective. Right. We go on to the next point. We are still measuring on the side of Vietcong strategies. We are still measuring on the side of the strategies that were used by the Vietcong guerrillas. Right. We can also add that the Vietcong did not wear uniforms during the war. It's a point. It's a standpoint on its own, which you can use for a paragraph. The Vietcong guerrillas did not wear uniforms during the Vietnam War. Then you go on to explain why the rationale for them not wearing uniforms. Is it that they did not afford the uniform? Or how was it beneficial for them? How did they get to know each other if given that they were not uniformed? Right. We go on to explain the Vietcong soldiers could not wear on uniform so that they could not be easily identified by the enemy and so that they would blend safely with the countryside. The American soldiers could not identify who the guerrillas were and who the civilians were during the Vietnam War. This gave them an upper hand when attacking the US troops. We are now referring to the non-wearing of uniforms. It gave the Vietcong an upper hand when attacking the US troops, since they could not be easily identified. The fact that they were not wearing uniform, it will mean that they would easily attack the enemy unknown, because the enemy could not, the US troops could not identify who the guerrillas were. Because remember, during the war, there are also civilians who are going around with their ordinary business. So you would never identify, you would never know who is your enemy and who is an innocent person amongst the people who are around you. So that was to the advantage of the Vietcong. They would easily attack because American soldiers were uniformed. they would actually see that this one is an American soldier, and they would easily attack. And they would even attack from a nearby angle, because they would have time to wedge closer to the enemy, because they would be unidentified. The American troops would just assume that they are ordinary civilians because they are not uniformed. So it gave them an upper hand in the war. And also it weakened American strategies. Imagine how would you attack someone whom you are not sure is a guerrilla, which meant that no matter what rifles the American soldiers were holding, they could not use them like anyhow, because they didn't know who to shoot and who to attack, because the guerrillas were ununiformed. So you explain that and you link it back to the fact that it worked in favor of the Viet Cong, and it disadvantaged the Americans in the particular war. Right. Then we can also use, we can also go to another strategy, which is the Viet Cong used the neighboring countries as their support in the war. It's a very valid point, which you can also use in the war, in the presentation. Right. What are we talking about here? We're not talking of neighboring countries. Right. The Viet Cong were getting support from neighboring countries. And also they were seeking refuge in neighboring countries. They would go and hide from neighboring countries, strategizing how to attack the American soldiers. And those neighboring countries were very supportive of them. Which neighboring countries are we talking about? We can mention states like Cambodia. We can mention states like Laos. Those are the typical neighboring states to the South Vietnam. They were making use of those neighboring countries to reinforce their side, to gain more strength and keep fighting the Americans. So it worked in favor of the for the Viet Cong and to the disadvantage of the Americans. Then we can also talk of, besides those strategies by the Viet Cong, I think we have mentioned a number of strategies that were used by the Viet Cong. What we also need to do before we look at the American strategies, we can also use talk of the strategy that was used by the Viet Cong, the tactic that was used by Viet Cong, which also confused the Americans and which worked in favor of the Viet Cong and disadvantages the strategies by America. Right. We can talk of a strategy which was called the Tet Offensive. Tet Offensive. Right. What was the Tet Offensive? Right. The Tet Offensive was more or less similar to guerrilla tactics. But in this instance now, it was no more man-to-man. Now, the Viet Cong guerrillas were now attacking cities which were controlled by USA. They were targeting to attack the cities that were controlled by America during the war. And they were using unconventional strategies again. Remember, the Americans didn't know when a particular city was going to be attacked. It was just attacked out of surprise. So we are saying here in this instance, the Viet Cong, they used the Tet Offensive in the Vietnam War. What was the Tet Offensive? The Tet Offensive involved surprise attacks on American controlled cities. They were targeting to attack American controlled cities. How did they attack those cities? They ambushed USA controlled cities and attacked them. By ambushing, you are attacking from a hidden angle. So they were ambushing, they would attack a city from a hidden angle and at unknown times using unknown strategies. That was the Tet Offensive. They were making surprise attacks. And we can give historical evidence. What historical evidence can we give? They attacked 100 cities that were controlled by the USA. It was an attack on 100 cities that were controlled by the USA. Right. When we are linking this Tet Offensive, we need to refer it back to the fact that it was effective and it led to the ineffectiveness of their strategies by Viet Cong. How can we link this Tet Offensive? Because we have explained it, we have given some historical evidence, and also we can also give historical evidence that the Tet Offensive was implemented in 1968. They used the Tet Offensive in 1968. That was when they targeted the US-controlled cities and attacked them, ambushed them, and attacked them. Right. When we are giving a linking statement to this, we can say the Tet Offensive made it very difficult for the USA troops to enforce effective counterattack measures, and hence it made their strategies very ineffective. When someone is attacking you at an unknown date and using unknown tactics, coming from an unknown angle, it means no matter how much you want to prepare, you never know how to prepare for such. So we are saying, despite the mighty power of America, it was caught unprepared at any point in time because they were ambushed and were attacked out of surprise, which meant whatever strategy that they were going to use to make a counterattack would be ineffective because these guys would come prepared. They would attack in the shortest possible time and would disappear. So for the Americans to prepare a counterattack, it would be very expensive and time costly for them. So it meant that on the American side, their strategies were made ineffective due to the fact that the Viet Cong were attacking from unknown angles using unknown strategies, and they were attacking the cities using ambush strategies, which is non-conventional. So we are referring back to a line of argument. We are substantiating our argument that the strategies and tactics that the Viet Cong used were successful and